Bride left at the altar says, "The first one to stand up I'll marry." And a homeless man stood up. Jessica Miller felt the tears streaming down her face as she stood still at the altar of St. Michael's Church in Denver. Her eyes scanned the pews, filled with guests whispering among themselves, some with pity, others with malicious curiosity. The wedding dress that had cost 3 months of her mother's salary weighed on her shoulders like an anchor of shame. Tyler should have arrived 20 minutes ago. Father Patrick paced nervously along the side aisle, checking his watch every few seconds. Jessica's mother, Margaret, sat in the front row, trying to hide her desperation while fidgeting with her phone, sending messages that went unanswered. "My dear, maybe it's best," Father Patrick began, approaching her carefully. "No." Jessica raised her voice, echoing through the entire church. "He'll come." Tyler promised he'd be here, but deep in her heart, a bitter certainty grew like a poisonous weed. She had known Tyler Johnson for 3 years. She knew his habit of running away when things got too serious. She knew how he always made excuses when it was time to take responsibility. The heavy silence of the church was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. Jessica turned hopefully, but it was only Brandon, Tyler's best man, who entered through the side door with a grim expression. "Jessica, I need to talk to you," he said, breathing heavily. "Where's Tyler?" she asked, even though she didn't want to hear the answer. He's not coming. He left this for you." Brandon held out a crumpled envelope. With trembling hands, Jessica opened it and read the few handwritten lines. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I can't do this. You deserve someone better than me." The entire church seemed to stop breathing. Margaret stood up abruptly, her face red with indignation. Jessica's father, Robert Miller, clenched his fists at his sides. The murmurs started low and grew like a storm. "That coward!" Margaret shouted, breaking the silence. 3 years. 3 years of my daughter's life wasted." Jessica felt the world spinning around her. The flowers decorating the altar seemed to wilt before her eyes. The white dress that had symbolized her dreams now felt like a shroud of humiliation. The guests began shifting uncomfortably, some standing to leave, others whispering comments that cut like knives. "I always knew that boy was no good," murmured Diane, a distant cousin of the family, always so full of himself. "Poor girl," sighed another guest. "What a shame to go through this in front of everyone." Jessica looked at the faces around her. Some showed genuine pity, others morbid curiosity, and some even a quiet pleasure at her misfortune. She thought of all the mornings she had woken up dreaming of this day, all the nights she had spent planning every detail of the ceremony, all the money her family had saved to make this wedding happen. The weight of humiliation was crushing. She could feel the judgmental stares, could hear the whispers that would follow her for months. That's Jessica, the girl who got left at the altar. That's how she'd be remembered for the rest of her life. Suddenly, a deep, liberating anger took hold of her. A fury toward Tyler, toward the hypocrisy of the guests, toward the whole situation. If they were expecting a spectacle, she'd give them one. "You want to see a wedding?" Jessica shouted, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the church. "Then you'll see a wedding." All murmurs stopped instantly. Margaret stared at her daughter with wide eyes. Father Patrick froze in the middle of the center aisle. "I came here to get married," Jessica continued, turning to face all the guests. "And I'm getting married today, in this church, right? Now the first man who stands up, I'll marry him." An absolute silence fell over the church. 200 people held their breath at once. Jessica could hear her own heart pounding like a desperate drum. Her eyes scanned the pews, daring anyone to accept her outrageous proposal. Seconds that felt like hours passed. No one moved. The married men glanced at their wives. The single ones seemed frozen by the absurdity of the situation. Some young men exchanged nervous looks, but none dared to budge. Then slowly a movement at the back of the church caught everyone's attention. A man stood up, but it wasn't one of the well-dressed guests filling the pews. It was a man who had slipped, and quietly during the commotion, probably seeking shelter from the harsh afternoon sun. His clothes were simple and worn, a beige button-up shirt undone at the chest, khaki pants with visible patches. His feet were bare, and his dark hair was in need of a trim. "I accept," he said in a calm voice that carried clearly to the altar. Jessica felt her legs weaken. She had spoken on impulse, never imagining someone would actually stand up, and she certainly hadn't expected it to be a man like that, clearly poor, likely a beggar who had sought refuge in the church. The man began walking down the central aisle. His bare feet made little sound on the cold marble floor. Each step echoed like thunder in the absolute silence of the church. The guests turned their heads to follow his path, their expressions ranging from shock to horror to morbid fascination. "Jessica, no," whispered Margaret, rising from the pew. "You can't be serious." But Jessica looked into the eyes of the approaching man. There was something in them that both calmed and frightened her at once. It wasn't madness. It wasn't opportunism. It was a sincerity she hadn't seen in Tyler's eyes for a long time. "What's your name?" she asked when he reached the altar. "David," he answered simply. "David Wilson." "David Wilson," Jessica repeated as if testing the sound of the name. "Are you sure about what you're doing?" "And you," he countered, a half smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. His question caught her off guard. She had acted on impulse, out of anger, out of humiliation. But now, looking at this man, David Wilson, she wondered if there wasn't something deeper in her decision. "Father Patrick," Jessica said, turning to the priest who was watching everything with wide eyes, "can you perform the ceremony?" "My child, this is..." The priest stammered, clearly torn between his religious duties and the absurdity of the situation. "It's a religious ceremony like any other," Jessica insisted. "Two consenting adults marrying before God." "But you don't even know this." "Man?" Margaret exclaimed, climbing the altar steps. "Sweetheart, you've lost your mind. Let's go home right now." "No!" Jessica stepped back as her mother tried to grab her arm. "I won't go home a failure. I came here to get married, and that's what I'm going to do." David watched the argument in silence, his hands folded in front of him. There was a calmness about him that contrasted dramatically with the chaos around him. When Jessica looked at him again, he gave a slight nod as if to say he'd respect whatever decision she made. "Father Patrick," a strong voice called from the back of the church. Everyone turned to see Richard Johnson, Tyler's father, walking down the central aisle. "This farce needs to stop right now." Richard was an imposing man, the owner of a car dealership in the city. His presence always commanded respect, and his deep voice made several people shrink in their seats. "My son may have made a mistake, but that doesn't justify this madness," Richard continued, gesturing toward David. "Who is this man? Where did he come from? What kind of intentions does he have?" "His intentions are better than your son's," Jessica retorted, surprising even herself with her own courage. "At least he had the decency to stay." "Courage?" Richard laughed bitterly. "That's not courage, girl, that's opportunism. This man sees a well-dressed woman in a fancy church and thinks he's hit the jackpot." David finally spoke, his voice calm despite Richard's obvious hostility. "You're mistaken. I'm not here for money or opportunity. I'm here because a woman asked a question, and I chose to answer honestly." "Honestly?" Richard scoffed. "What honesty can come from someone who clearly lives on the streets?" "Richard, stop this," Father Patrick intervened, finally finding his voice. "This is a sacred place, not a courtroom." But Richard didn't. "Stop." He stepped closer to David, studying him with a critical eye. "Look at him," he said, addressing the guests. "Barefoot, in torn clothes, probably doesn't even have a place to sleep tonight. And you think he'd be a suitable husband for a girl like Jessica?" Jessica felt her anger rise again, not at David, but at Richard and everyone else judging a man based solely on his appearance. "And Tyler would be?" she challenged. "Tyler, who ran away like a coward? Who didn't even have the decency to tell me in person he didn't want to marry me? Who left me here like a fool in front of 200 people? Tyler is young. He made a mistake," Richard defended, though his voice had lost some of its force. "But that doesn't mean you should make an even worse decision." "Worse why?" Jessica took a step toward Richard. "Because David is poor? Because his clothes aren't expensive? Because he doesn't drive a new car?" The confrontation was growing more intense. Margaret discreetly tried to pull Jessica away from the altar, while Robert, Jessica's father, watched with a concerned but thoughtful expression. "Jessica," Robert finally spoke. "Your mother is right. You're making a decision in the heat of the moment. Let's go home, let things settle, and we'll talk calmly tomorrow." "No, Dad. I'm tired of being the well-behaved daughter who always does what everyone expects. I'm tired of living to please everyone but myself." Jessica looked around St. Michael's Church, seeing the faces of relatives, friends, and acquaintances, people who had come to celebrate her wedding to Tyler, but now stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "You know what's funny?" she said, her voice growing stronger. "You're all worried about what people will think of me for marrying David, but no one's talking about what they think of Tyler for abandoning me here." The silence that followed was telling. Jessica was right. Everyone had been so focused on criticizing her impulsive decision that they'd forgotten to question Tyler's cowardice. "You think it's better for me to go home humiliated and single than to marry an honest man who had the courage to accept my proposal. But, sweetheart," Margaret interjected gently, "you know nothing about this young man. What if he's dangerous? What if he has a criminal record?" What if, Jessica repeated. "My whole life, you've taught me to fear the what-ifs. What if Tyler wasn't the right man? What if he hurt me?" Well, now we know the answers to those questions. David, who had remained silent throughout the entire discussion, finally addressed Margaret. "Ma'am, your concern for your daughter is understandable. If I may, I'd like to tell you a few things about myself." Margaret looked at him, skeptically, but motioned for him to continue. "My name is David Wilson. I'm 28 years old. I don't own a home right now, that's true, but I work whenever I can find a job. I can read and write. I've never had any trouble with the law. And I promise you, ma'am, I would never harm your daughter." "What kind of work do you do?" asked Robert Miller, interested despite himself. "Construction, mostly. Sometimes I find work on farms, tending to animals. Any honest work? That comes my way." Richard let out a mocking laugh. "So, an unskilled worker with no stability, no prospects. Exactly what every mother dreams of for her daughter." "At least he works," Jessica shot back. "At least he doesn't live off his father like Tyler." That remark hit Richard like a punch. It was true that Tyler, at 25, still relied on his father financially and worked at the dealership more out of obligation than passion. "My child," said Father Patrick, stepping forward again, "I need to be sure you both understand the seriousness of the sacrament of marriage. It's not something that can be easily undone if you change your minds tomorrow." "I understand, Father," Jessica replied, "and I accept the consequences of my decision." "What about you, David?" asked the priest. David looked straight into Jessica's eyes before answering. "Father, I'm not a man of many words or grand gestures, but when I give my word, I keep it. If Jessica agrees to marry me, I promise to care for her, respect her, and honor her for the rest of my life." The sincerity in his voice left several people in the church silent. There was a dignity in him that transcended his simple clothes and financial situation. "Jessica," Margaret whispered, pulling her daughter aside, "please think carefully. You're an educated, beautiful young woman with a future ahead of you. Don't throw it all away because of a moment of anger." "Mom, what if it's not anger? What if it's the first honest decision I've made in my life?" "What do you mean? How many times have I told you Tyler didn't make me happy? How many times did I say something was wrong between us, but you always said he was a good match, that he had a future, that I should settle?" Margaret opened her mouth to protest but closed it again. Jessica was right. Over the past few months, she had complained repeatedly about Tyler's behavior, about how he treated her more like an accessory than a partner. And now here's a man who barely knows me, but had the courage to accept my proposal when everyone else just stood there. Jessica continued, "It doesn't matter if he's poor. It doesn't matter if he hasn't had the same opportunities as Tyler. He's shown more character in 5 minutes than Tyler has in 3 years. But honey, love," Margaret began. "What love, Mom?" Jessica interrupted, the tears now dry on her face. "Was Tyler's love for me so strong that he ran away on our wedding day? The love that made me accept being treated as second best for years?" Robert stepped closer to the group, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. "Margaret, maybe we should let our daughter make her own decision." "Robert!" Margaret exclaimed, incredulous. "You can't possibly be agreeing to this madness." "I don't know if I agree," he admitted. "But I know our daughter is an adult now, and maybe we've interfered too much in her choices up to this point." Richard, seeing he was losing control of the situation, played his last card. "Father Patrick, surely there's some church rule preventing this kind of impulsive marriage. You can't just decide to get married in 5 minutes." Father Patrick, who had remained silent for a few moments, let out a deep sigh. "Mr. Richard, the church does not require couples to know each other for a specific period before marriage. What we require is that both are capable adults, that they consent freely, and that they understand the sacred nature of matrimony." "But it's obvious they don't know each other," insisted Richard. "That's true," admitted the priest, "but it's also true that many marriages we consider well-planned end in failure, while others that begin under unusual circumstances flourish over time." Jessica looked at David, who had remained calm throughout the discussion. There was something about him that reassured her. Maybe it was the way he didn't try to defend himself against Richard's accusations, or how he looked at her with genuine respect. "David," she said, "are you sure you want to do this? It's not just about accepting my proposal, it's about marrying me with everything that means, with my family, with the criticism we'll face, with the hardships that will surely come." David studied her for a long moment before answering. "Jessica, I can't promise our life will be easy. I don't have money. I don't have a home to offer you. I don't have a guaranteed future. But I can promise I'll never abandon you. Like they did today. I can promise I'll work every day to build a decent life for both of us. And I can promise I'll respect you the way you deserve to be respected." His words touched something deep inside Jessica. For the first time in years, someone was making promises based on character, not material possessions. "Father Patrick," she said, turning to the priest, "I'd like to marry David Wilson today now in this church. And I accept marrying Jessica Miller," David added. The priest looked at them, then at their families, then at the guests watching in absolute silence. "Very well," he finally said. "If you're certain of your decision, I'll perform the ceremony." A murmur of shock rippled through the church. Some people began standing to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others stayed in their seats, fascinated by how events were unfolding. "This is absurd," shouted Richard. "Father, you'll regret allowing this farce." "Mr. Richard," Father Patrick replied firmly, "I celebrate the union of two adults who have freely consented to marry. Whether this is a farce or not, only God can judge." Richard, realizing he had lost the battle, stormed out of the church, followed by a few other guests who shared his outrage. Margaret remained by her daughters' side, tears streaming down her face. "Jessica, my dear, I hope you know what you're doing." "I hope so too, Mom. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something because I want to, not because it's what others expect of me." Robert Miller stepped forward and extended his hand to David. "Young man, I don't know if my daughter is right or wrong. But if you're going through with this, then you're part of the family now, and in our family, we take care of each other." David shook his father-in-law's hand firmly. "Thank you, sir, I won't let you down." Father Patrick took his place at the altar and motioned for Jessica and David to come forward. What had started as a traditional wedding was turning into something entirely different. "Before we begin," the priest said, "would you like a few minutes to talk? To be absolutely sure this is what you want?" Jessica and David exchanged glances. It was a fair question. They barely knew each other, and they were about to make vows that would last forever. "We can talk right here," Jessica said. "In front. For everyone." David nodded in agreement. "Jessica," he said, taking her hands, "I know this is strange for you. It is for me too. But when you asked that question, something inside me answered. It wasn't thought, it was instinct. It was as if I knew this was the most important moment of my life. And for me," she replied, "it was like I was finally following my heart instead of my head. For years, I did everything that was sensible, everything that was right. And it brought me here, abandoned at the altar by a man who promised to love me. Do you both understand that marriage isn't just a moment of emotion?" Father Patrick interjected gently. "It's a daily commitment, it's work, it's patience, It's mutual forgiveness. I understand, Father, said David, and I'm ready for that work. So am I, Jessica confirmed. The priest nodded slowly. Then let us proceed with the ceremony. He opened the prayer book and began reciting the traditional words. But nothing about that moment was traditional. The bride's eyes were red from crying. The groom was barefoot and dressed humbly. Half the guests had left, and those who remained whispered among themselves. Dear brothers and sisters, Father Patrick addressed those present, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Jessica and David in holy matrimony. His voice echoed through the church, lending an unexpected solemnity to the moment. Some people stopped whispering and paid attention to the familiar words. Marriage was ordained by God as an expression of love between man and woman, and as the foundation of family life. Jessica looked at David as the priest spoke. There was something surreal about standing there, exchanging vows with a man she had met less than an hour ago. Yet at the same time, there was a strange certainty in her heart. Jessica Miller, the priest continued, do you take David Wilson to be your husband, to love and cherish him in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, all the days of your life? The question echoed through the church. This was the moment of truth. Jessica could still back out, could say it had been a moment of madness. No one would blame her. But when she looked into David's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in Tyler's: absolute honesty. There was no calculation, no self-interest, only a willingness to accept whatever might come. I do, she said, her voice clear and steady. David Wilson, said the priest, do you take Jessica Miller to be your wife, to love and cherish her in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, all the days of your life? David didn't hesitate for even a second. I do. The rings, please, the priest requested. Jessica realized with horror that the rings were with Brandon, who had left with the other outraged guests. She looked at the priest in panic. We don't have rings, she whispered. It's all right, David said calmly. He slipped a small, simple silver ring from his finger and offered it to her. This was my mother's. If you'll accept it. Jessica looked at the plain ring. It had no diamonds, wasn't gold, and was probably worth a fraction of the ring Tyler had bought for her, but it had history. It had meaning. It's beautiful, she said, extending her hand. David slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly loose, but Jessica curled her fingers to hold it in place. I'm sorry I don't have a ring for you, she said. You don't need to, David replied. The promise isn't in the ring. Father Patrick smiled at the simplicity of the gesture. Then, by the authority vested in me by the church, I now pronounce you husband and wife. A complete silence fell over the church. Jessica and David looked at each other, still not fully believing what had just happened. You may kiss the bride, the priest said gently. David hesitated for a moment, then leaned in and gave Jessica a gentle kiss on the cheek. It was a respectful gesture, not invasive. Even in that intimate moment, he showed consideration for her. The few guests who had remained in the church began to applaud, some with genuine enthusiasm, others out of politeness. Margaret openly wept, though Jessica didn't know if they were tears of sadness or relief. Well, said Father Patrick, closing the book, you are now officially husband and wife. May God bless you. Jessica looked around the church. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. An hour ago, she was a jilted bride. Now she was a married woman to a man she barely knew. And now, she asked, more to herself than to David. Now, he said, we begin our life together. The simplicity of his answer reassured her. There were no grand plans, no lofty promises, just the acceptance that they had a path to walk together. Margaret approached the couple, her eyes still damp. Where will you go now, she asked, the maternal concern clear in her voice. It was a practical and urgent question. Jessica realized she hadn't thought about the practical details of her impulsive decision. She had planned a honeymoon with Tyler in Aspen. She had a house rented for after the wedding, but now she was married to a man who, by his own admission, had no place to live. You can stay with us until you get settled, offered Robert Miller, surprising everyone, including his wife. Robert, Margaret exclaimed. What? He replied. Jessica is our daughter. Now David is our son-in-law. We can't leave them on the street." David shook his head. "Thank you for the offer, sir, but it wouldn't be right. Jessica and I need to build our own life." "But where will you stay?" Margaret insisted. "We'll figure it out," Jessica said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "We always do." Father Patrick approached the couple. "You need to sign the marriage documents, and you'll need to register the union at the courthouse in the next few days." They followed the priest to the sacristy, where the official papers awaited them. As they signed the documents, Jessica had a moment of surreal clarity. She was literally signing a new life into existence. "There," said Father Patrick when they finished, "you are now officially married in the eyes of the law and the church." When they returned to the nave of the church, they found only Jessica's parents and a few close relatives. Most of the guests had left, taking with them stories that would be told for years in Denver. "Well," Robert said, breaking the awkward silence, "how about we all go home? Margaret made enough food for 200 people." "Dad," Jessica said, "I think it's best if David and I leave. Today has been hard on everyone." "Nonsense," Robert interrupted. "You just got married. Let's celebrate as a family." Margaret, still visibly shaken, nodded reluctantly. "He's right. I made the food, the guests are gone, but that doesn't mean we can't have a small celebration." David looked at Jessica, leaving the decision to her. "All right," she said, "but just for a little while." They left the church together. Outside, the afternoon sun still shone brightly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A few onlookers who had lingered outside the church watched them leave, whispering among themselves. Robert had brought his car, a simple but well-kept sedan. Jessica and David sat in the back in silence during the drive to the Miller family home. "David," Margaret said, turning from the front seat, "do you have family here in Denver?" "No. Ma'am, my family was from the countryside. I came here a few years ago looking for work." "And do you keep in touch with them?" David hesitated before answering. "I don't have any family left, ma'am. My parents passed away when I was young." The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica realized there was much about David's life she didn't know. In fact, there was almost everything about him she didn't know. The Miller home was modest but cozy, in a middle-class neighborhood of the city. When they arrived, Margaret rushed to the kitchen to check the food she'd prepared for the reception that never happened. "David," said Robert Miller, "would you like to take a shower and change? I can lend you some of my clothes." "Thank you, sir, but I don't want to be a bother." "Son, you're my son-in-law now. It's no bother." Jessica watched the interaction between her father and her new husband. There was a natural kindness in Robert that had always made her proud. He was clearly making an effort to accept the unusual situation. "Take him up on it, David," said Jessica. "It'll do you good, and us too." David nodded and followed Robert to the bathroom. Jessica was left alone in the living room, finally having a moment to process what had happened. She was still wearing her wedding dress, which now felt heavy and out of place. The simple silver band on her finger constantly reminded her that her life had completely changed in a matter of hours. Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Jessica, come help me here." The daughter followed her mother into the kitchen, where a full feast awaited them. Margaret had prepared finger foods, a 3-tiered cake, hot dishes, everything for a celebration that had turned into something entirely different. "Mom, how much money did you spend on this wedding?" asked Jessica, suddenly aware of the financial impact of her decision. "That doesn't matter now," Margaret replied, but Jessica could see the worry in her eyes. "It does. You spent your savings to give me a beautiful wedding, and You got married," Margaret interrupted. "Maybe not the way we planned, but you did. And now we have to deal with the consequences." Mother and daughter worked in silence for a few minutes, arranging the food on smaller plates. There was enough to feed an army, and now there were just 4 of them. "Mom," Jessica said eventually, "I know you think I've lost my mind." "You have," Margaret said bluntly, "but it's done. Now the question is, what are you going to do?" "What do you mean? You married a man you don't know, who has no money, no home. How are you going to live?" It was a practical question Jessica had avoided thinking about. For years, she had planned a life with Tyler, who had a stable job and prospects of inheriting his father's business. Now she was married to David, who by his own admission lived on odd jobs. "We'll figure it out," she said, echoing the words she'd spoken at the church. "Figuring it out doesn't pay rent, Jessica. It doesn't put food on the table. I can work, Mom. I have an accounting degree, remember? I can get a job." "And David, what will he do?" "He said he works in construction. There's always demand for that." Margaret sighed deeply. "Honey, you grew up in a home where you never lacked anything. Do you know what it's like to struggle for work, to not have enough money to pay the bills at the end of the month?" "No," Jessica admitted, "but I can learn." "What if you can't? What if it's harder than you imagine?" Jessica stopped cutting the finger foods and looked at her mother. "Mom, do you want me to regret it? Do you want me to say I made a mistake? I want you to be realistic, to think about the hardships ahead. And you think with Tyler there wouldn't have been hardships. He left me at the altar, Mom, at the altar. What kind of hardships would I have had with a man capable of that?" Margaret had no answer for that. She had also been shocked by Tyler's attitude, though she had never admitted her own doubts about the young man. Robert Miller appeared in the kitchen with David, who was now wearing borrowed dress pants and a white shirt. His hair was clean and combed. The transformation was striking. "Wow," murmured Jessica, seeing her husband in clean clothes for the first time. David smiled shyly. "Thank you for the clothes, sir. I'll return them as soon as I can wash mine." "No need to return them," said Robert. "I have more clothes than I can wear anyway." Margaret observed David with new eyes. Clean and well-dressed, he was an attractive man. There was a natural dignity about him that didn't depend on expensive clothes. "Well," she finally relented a little, "let's eat then. No sense letting all this food go to waste." They sat at the kitchen table, which Margaret had set with her best china. It was strange to have a wedding reception for 4 people, but there was something cozy about the intimacy of the situation. "David," Robert said, "tell me about yourself. Where you're from, how you ended up in Denver." David finished, chewing before answering. "I was born in a small town in the countryside of São Paulo, sir. My parents had a small farm. When they passed away, I couldn't keep the property and came here looking for opportunities. How long ago was that?" 5 years. "And what kind of work have you done since then?" "A bit of everything. Mostly construction, but I've also worked in warehouses, helped with moving jobs, tended gardens. Any honest work that came my way." Jessica listened to the conversation in silence. She was learning about the life of the man she'd married through an interview with her father. "And where have you been living?" Margaret asked. David hesitated again. "For the last few months in a cheap boarding house downtown. Before that, I shared an apartment with other workers." "And now?" "Now," David said, looking at Jessica, "we need to find a place to start our life together." The silence that followed was heavy with practical implications. Finding a place to live cost money they didn't have. "Listen," Robert finally said, "I know you want independence and I respect that. But how about a compromise? You stay here for a few weeks until you get settled. David helps with some repairs I need done, and you save money to rent your own place." Jessica and David exchanged glances. It was a practical and generous offer. "We don't want to be a burden," David said. "You wouldn't be. And honestly, it would give Margaret and me peace of mind knowing you're not struggling." "What do you think, Mom?" Jessica asked. "What do I think?" Margaret sighed. "I think we don't have much choice. You made a hasty decision and now we all have to deal with the consequences. It wasn't exactly enthusiastic approval, but it was a start." "Thank you," David said. "I promise we won't take advantage of your hospitality. And I promise we'll find our own place as soon as possible," Jessica added. They finished the meal in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for everyone. After dinner, Robert showed David the garage where there was a workbench with tools and some unfinished woodworking projects. "Do you know anything about woodworking?" he asked. "A little. My father taught me the basics before he passed." "Good. I have some furniture that needs repairs. If you'd like to work on it tomorrow." "Of course, sir, it would be my pleasure." While the men talked in the garage, Jessica helped her mother wash the dishes. "He seems like a good young man," Margaret admitted reluctantly. He does, Jessica agreed. But you still don't really know him, dear. You don't know how he is when he's angry, when he's under pressure, when things get tough. I also didn't know how Tyler was under pressure, Jessica replied. And I found out the worst way possible. Margaret couldn't argue with that. Just promise me one thing, she said. If things don't work out, if you realize you made a mistake, don't be too proud to ask for help. I promise, Mom. Later that night, Jessica found herself in her childhood bedroom with David. The situation was awkward and uncomfortable. They were married, but they were also strangers. I can sleep on the couch, David offered. No, Jessica said quickly. I mean, we're married. We can share the bed, just to sleep. David nodded in understanding. Of course. They got ready for bed in uneasy silence. Jessica put on a modest nightgown, and David kept the pants and t-shirt Robert Miller had lent him. When they lay down, each stayed on their own side of the bed, carefully avoiding any contact. Jessica, David said in the dark, do you regret it? The question caught her off guard. She had avoided asking herself the same thing all day. Ask me that tomorrow, she replied. When the adrenaline wears off and I can think clearly. Fair. And you? Do you regret it? No, he said without hesitation. Whatever happens, I don't regret having the courage to accept your proposal. Jessica turned to look at him in the dark. Why did you do it, David? Why agree to marry a stranger? David was silent for a long moment. Because when you asked that question, it felt like the universe was giving me a chance I never thought I'd have. The chance to build a family, to have someone to care for, and who cares for me. Even if it's crazy, even if it doesn't work out, it was worth trying. His honesty touched her deeply. What if we're not compatible? What if we find out we're completely different people? Then we'll learn to live with our differences. Or we'll find out it's not possible, but at least we tried. Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the day finally settling over her. In 12 hours, her life had completely changed. That morning, she'd been an anxious bride. Now she was a married woman sharing a bed with a man she didn't know. Good night, David, she whispered. Good night, Jessica. But neither of them slept easily that first night. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Jessica woke to the sound of hammering coming from the garage. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was and what had happened. Then reality came rushing back like a wave. She was married to David Wilson. She looked beside her and saw the bed was empty. David had gotten up without waking. Jessica could hear men's voices talking outside, probably David and her father working together. She dressed quickly and went down to the kitchen, where she found her mother making breakfast. Good morning, Mom. Good morning. How did you sleep? Fine, Jessica lied. In truth, she'd been awake most of the night, processing the events of the previous day. David woke up early and went to help your dad in the garage. It seems he really knows his way around woodworking. Jessica looked through the kitchen window and saw the two men working on a shelf Robert Miller had been trying to fix for months. David handled the tools with familiarity and confidence. He seems to be adjusting well, Jessica observed. Yes, your father's impressed with him. Mother and daughter prepared breakfast in silence. There was a strange normality to the situation, as if David had always been part of the family. Jessica, Margaret said eventually, we need to talk about some practical matters. Like what? Like the fact that you'll need a job. Both of you will need work if you want to build an independent life. I know, Mom, I've already thought about it. And what have you thought? What kind of job will you look for? Accounting, mostly, or administrative work at some company. And do you think it'll be easy to find? Jessica hesitated. She had graduated with an accounting degree 2 years ago, but had never actually worked in the field. She had gotten engaged to Tyler right after graduation and had focused on planning the wedding. Maybe not easy, but it's not impossible. And David? What kind of future can you build with sporadic construction jobs? Mom, plenty of families live like that. It's not the end of the world. Families who've always lived that way, Jessica. Not young women who grew up with some comfort and suddenly have to face financial insecurity. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the men, who came in to wash up before breakfast. "Good morning," David said, smiling shyly at Jessica. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Robert Miller was visibly excited. "Margaret, you should see the work David did on the bookshelf. In 2 hours, he fixed what I'd been struggling with for months. It's just about having the right tools and a little patience," David said modestly. "Nonsense, the boy has real talent. David, have you ever thought about starting your own business? Carpentry, repairs, that kind of thing?" David shook his head. "That would take startup capital, sir. My own tools, a workspace, money for materials. It's a nice dream, but not realistic for me right now." "But not impossible," Robert insisted. "With planning and hard work, it's achievable." Jessica watched her father's enthusiasm and realized he was genuinely impressed by David's skills. It was a side of her new husband she hadn't seen before. After breakfast, Robert got ready to leave for the accounting office where he was a partner. "David," he said before heading out, "if you'd like, you can keep working in the garage today. I have a few more projects to finish." "Thank you, sir, I'd be happy to." "And Jessica," her father added, "how about you start job hunting today? Doesn't hurt to see what's out there." Once Robert left, the house fell strangely quiet. Margaret went to tend to her chores, leaving Jessica and David alone for the first time since the wedding. "Want to take a walk?" David suggested. "Talk a little, get to know each other better." "Good idea." They went for a stroll through the neighborhood. It was a sunny morning, and the streets were busy with people heading to work and children walking to school. "David," Jessica said after a few minutes of silence, "tell me more about your family, about how you grew up." David let out a deep sigh. "Not much to tell. My parents were simple, hard-working people. My father tended a small farm. My mother helped with the house and raising chickens. It was a tough life, but we were happy." "How did they pass?" "A car accident when I was 22. They were coming back from town after selling farm goods." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you, it was really hard. They were still young, had so much life ahead, and suddenly I was alone, not knowing how to keep the farm running." "Is that why you came to Denver?" "I ended up losing the farm to debt. Couldn't produce enough to keep up. I came to the city thinking it'd be easier to find work, but I learned urban life has its own struggles." Jessica tried to imagine what it must have been like for David to go from a rural life to the uncertainty of the big city. "And the last 5 years? How have they been?" "Hard at times. Some months there's plenty of work, others I can barely pay the rent. But I've always managed. I've never gone hungry, never slept on the street. Isn't it a bit lonely, living like that without family, without roots?" David stopped walking and looked at her. "It was. Until yesterday." The simplicity of his answer touched Jessica deeply. She realized David saw their marriage not as an adventure or an experiment, but as a real chance to rebuild the family he had lost. "And you?" he asked. "Tell me about your life with Tyler. How did you meet?" Jessica hesitated. Talking about Tyler felt like a betrayal of her new marriage, but David had a right to know. "We met in college. He was in his last year of business school when I started accounting. He was popular, handsome, came from a well-established family. When he showed interest in me, I felt flattered. Were you happy?" "At first, yes, or at least I thought it was happiness. But over time, I started to realize Tyler saw our relationship more as a convenient arrangement than a true romance." "What do you mean?" "He needed a respectable girlfriend to introduce to his parents for social events. I was pretty, came from a decent family, was well-mannered. I served the purpose." "And you accepted that?" "I tried to believe it was love, that with time he'd learn to truly love me. That's why I said yes when he proposed." "But you had doubts." "Many. In the last few months, Tyler was distant, irritable. Several times I suggested maybe we should postpone the wedding, but my parents and his insisted it was normal to be nervous before marriage." David listened quietly, without judgment. "And now you're married to me," he said when she finished. "Yes, to a man I don't know, who has no money, no clear prospects for the future. Any sensible person would say I went from a bad situation to a worse one. And what would you say? Jessica thought carefully before answering. I'd say that for the first time in a long while, I feel like I made a choice based on what I wanted, not what others expected of me. They had reached a small square with benches and trees. They sat on a bench in the shade. David, we need to be realistic about our situation, Jessica said. We don't know each other. We might find we're completely incompatible. And even if we get along, we have serious practical problems to solve. I agree. What kind of problems do you see? Money, mostly. We both need steady work. We need a place to live. We need to learn how to live together without killing each other. David chuckled softly. Well, at least one problem seems solvable. I don't think we'll kill each other. How can you be so sure? Because you had the courage to marry me yesterday and I had the courage to say yes. Courageous people usually find a way to solve their problems. Or courageous people sometimes make stupid decisions that complicate their lives. Maybe. But I'd rather make brave choices and regret them than spend my whole life wondering, what if? Jessica studied David's face. There was a peace in him she envied. He seemed genuinely at ease with the decision they'd made, while she still wrestled with doubts and anxieties. You really don't regret it? She asked. No. Do you? Jessica thought about the question. If she could go back, would she do the same? I don't think so, she finally said. I don't think I regret it. Then let's work with that, David said, standing up from the bench. Let's go home and tackle the practical problems one at a time. When they returned home, they found Margaret reading the newspaper in the kitchen. How was your walk? She asked. Good, replied Jessica. We talked a lot. Great, because we have some practical decisions to make. Margaret opened the newspaper to the classifieds section. I looked at the job listings. There are some interesting opportunities for both of you. She pointed to several ads circled with a red pen. For you, Jessica, an accounting firm is looking for an assistant. A department store needs an administrative manager, and a construction company is hiring for their finance department. And for me, asked David, several construction companies hiring masons and helpers, a carpenter looking for an assistant, and look at this. She pointed to a specific ad. Seeking someone for general repairs in a residential building. Experience in electrical, plumbing, and carpentry work. Fixed salary plus superintendent's apartment. David and Jessica exchanged glances. An apartment would solve their housing problem immediately. Can I call to ask about this job? David asked. Of course, the phone is on the table. David dialed the number in the ad. Jessica and Margaret listened as he spoke with someone on the other end. Yes, sir. I saw your ad in the paper. Yes, I have experience in construction and carpentry. I know basic electrical and plumbing too. This afternoon? Sure, I can be there at 2 o'clock. Thank you, sir. He hung up with a hopeful expression. They want to interview me this afternoon. It's an apartment building downtown. If I get the job, we'd have a small place to live. That's wonderful, Margaret exclaimed, genuinely excited. And you, Jessica? Are you going to call about those jobs? I'll call the accounting office first. Jessica dialed the number listed. The conversation was brief but encouraging. They want to interview me too, she said after hanging up. Tomorrow morning. Perfect, said Margaret. You both could have jobs and a place to live in the same week. David looked at Jessica. Would you be willing to live in a superintendent's apartment? It might be very simple. David, I married you yesterday, without knowing where we'd sleep tonight. A simple apartment sounds like a palace compared to that. That afternoon, David got ready for the interview. He put on the borrowed clothes from Robert Miller again and carefully combed his hair. Do you want me to come with you? Jessica offered. Thanks, but I think it's better if I go alone. If I get the job, I'll bring you to see the place. Good luck. David gave Jessica a respectful kiss on the cheek before leaving. It was only their second kiss, and again it was chaste and gentle. After David left, Jessica found herself alone with her mother again. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Honestly? Confused, Jessica admitted. But not unhappy, it's strange. Strange how? With Tyler, I always felt like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. Trying to please him, impress his parents, fit into a life that wasn't really mine. And with David. With David, I feel like myself. He doesn't expect me to be anything other than who I am. He doesn't judge me for making an impulsive decision. In fact, he seems to admire it. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's good, but sweetheart, marriage is more than just feeling comfortable with someone. It's about building a life together, facing hardships, raising children. Children? Jessica hadn't considered that possibility. Mom, we just got married yesterday. We barely know each other. I know, but it's something you'll need to discuss eventually. Does David want kids? Do you? How will you support them? They were practical questions Jessica had avoided thinking about. With Tyler, they had vaguely talked about having kids eventually, but they'd never made concrete plans. One thing at a time, Mom. First work and housing, then we'll discuss children. 2 hours later, David returned with a radiant expression. I got it, he announced as soon as he walked through the door. Really? Jessica jumped to hug him, stopping abruptly when she realized what she was doing. They barely knew each other, yet she was acting like a wife married for years. Sorry, she said, stepping back. No need to apologize, David said gently. We're married. You can hug me whenever you want. This time, Jessica completed the hug. It was comforting to feel David's strong arms around her. Tell me everything, she said when they pulled apart. It's a 10-unit building. The previous superintendent retired. I'll handle general maintenance, cleaning common areas and small repairs. The pay isn't high, but it comes with a 2-bedroom apartment on the ground floor. 2 bedrooms? Living room, kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom. It's simple, but it's ours. When can we see it? Tomorrow morning. The building manager wants to meet you too, since we'll be living there. What if he doesn't like me? He will, David said confidently. How could he not? The simple, sincere remark made Jessica blush. David had a way of making her feel special without even trying. Margaret, David said, turning to his mother-in-law, thank you for everything you've done for us. As soon as we get our first paycheck, we'll repay you for all the expenses. No need, David. You're family now. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was lighter. The prospect of work and housing had eased much of the tension from the past 2 days. Dad, Jessica said, thank you for giving David a chance, for being so welcoming. Sweetheart, I won't lie and say I fully approved of your decision, but David has proven himself to be a man of character. That counts for a lot. And more than that, Margaret added, he treats you with respect. That's more than Tyler ever did. It was the first time Margaret had openly criticized Tyler, and Jessica was surprised. You never liked him, did you? She asked. It wasn't that I disliked him, but I felt he saw you as a trophy, not a partner. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you seemed happy, and who was I to question your choices? Jessica looked around the table, at the parents who had supported her unconditionally, and at David, who had entered her life so unexpectedly. I think everything happened the way it was supposed to, she said. Even if it was in a very unconventional way, Robert Miller agreed with a smile. The next morning, Jessica dressed carefully for her job interview. She chose a conservative suit and pulled her hair into a professional bun. Are you nervous? David asked as they walked to the bus stop. A little. It's been a while since I've had a job interview. You'll do great. You're smart, educated, and have a degree. Any company would be lucky to have you. His confidence in her was reassuring. Tyler had rarely shown that kind of unconditional support. The interview was at a small accounting firm that served small and medium-sized businesses. The owner, Mr. George Williams, was a middle-aged man with a serious but kind demeanor. So, Mrs. He glanced at her resume. Wilson, how long have you been married? 2 days, Jessica answered honestly. Mr. George raised his eyebrows in surprise. Well, that's recent. And what does your husband do? He just got a job as a building superintendent. I see. And you're looking for work because we want to build a stable life together. I have a degree in accounting and would like to work in my field. Mr. Mark asked some technical questions about accounting, which Jessica answered correctly. Then he explained the responsibilities of the position. It's a basic job to start with. Organizing documents, simple entries, customer service. The salary isn't high, but there's room for growth for those who apply themselves. I'd give it my all, sir. I can start next Monday. Does that give you enough time to get settled with the move? Yes, sir, thank you so much. Jessica left the office beaming. She had done it. She had a job in her field. Meanwhile, David was showing the caretaker's apartment to Margaret, who had insisted on seeing where her daughter would live. The apartment was truly simple. The walls needed paint, the wooden floors were worn, and the furniture that came with. It was old and basic, but it had good natural light and was clean. Well, said Margaret, looking around, it's not what I dreamed of for my daughter, but I've seen worse. With a little work, it can be quite cozy, said David. I can paint the walls, fix a few things, make it feel more like a home. And what about privacy? What are the other residents like? They seem like quiet people, mostly working families. The superintendent said there aren't any issues with parties or disturbances. Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied. David, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, Mom. How do you see your future with my daughter? Where do you two want to be in 5 years? David thought carefully before answering. Ma'am, I can't promise wealth or a luxurious life, but I can promise I'll work every day to improve our situation. I want us to have our own home someday, maybe a small business. And I want Jessica to be happy. And children, do you want children? If Jessica wants to, yes, I'd love to have a family, but that's a decision we'd have to make together. Margaret studied David closely. There was a sincerity in him that was hard to question. Do you really love my daughter, even after knowing her for such a short time? David hesitated. Ma'am, I don't know if what I feel is love yet, but I know that when I look at Jessica, I see a brave, smart, and beautiful woman who deserves to be treated like a queen. If that's not love, at least it's the start of something really good. When Jessica arrived at the apartment, she found David and her mother chatting animatedly in the small living room. So? David asked eagerly. How was the interview? I got it. I start on Monday. David hugged her and spun her around, making her laugh. It was the first moment of pure joy they'd shared since the wedding. That's wonderful, he said as he set her down. Both of us working, our own apartment. We're really building a life together. Yes, Jessica agreed, looking around the simple apartment. We are. Margaret watched their interaction with a thoughtful expression. Well, she said, it seems you two are on the right track. How about we have lunch at my place and then come back to make a list of what you'll need for the apartment? On the way back, Jessica walked between David and her mother, feeling a strange sense of wholeness. For the first time since the wedding, she began to believe that maybe her impulsive decision could turn into something good. David, she said, thank you. For what? For having the courage to accept my crazy proposal. For making this work. We're making it work, he corrected, together. And for the first time, Jessica truly believed they might. The following weekend, Jessica and David moved into the caretaker's apartment. It was a simple move. Jessica had only a few clothes and personal items, and David practically owned nothing beyond the clothes he was wearing when they got married. Robert Miller and Margaret helped with some basics: dishes, pots, sheets, towels, essential items to start a domestic life. I promise we'll return everything as soon as we can buy our own things, said Jessica. Don't worry about that now, Margaret replied. Focus on settling in first. The first day living together was strange and uncomfortable. They were still practically strangers, trying to share a small space and establish household routines. I can cook, David offered. I'm no chef, but I know the basics. I can cook a little too, said Jessica. We can take turns. They set up a simple division of chores. David would handle building maintenance during the day and help with cleaning and repairs in the apartment. Jessica would work at the office and take care of organizing the home and finances. The first challenge came at the end of the week when they received an unexpected visit from Richard Johnson, Tyler's father. May I come in? He asked when David opened the door. Of course, sir, David replied, though he looked confused. Richard stepped into the small apartment and glanced around with clear disapproval. So this is where you're living, he said, as if the place confirmed his worst suspicions. How can we help you, Mr. Richard? Jessica asked, stepping out of the kitchen. I came to talk to you about this situation. This ridiculous marriage you've gotten into. With all due respect, David interrupted, our marriage is none of your concern. Oh, it isn't? Richard laughed sarcastically. When my son is suffering because of this farce, it becomes my concern. Tyler is suffering? Jessica asked, genuinely surprised. Of course he is. He made a mistake, I admit. Running from the wedding was cowardly. But that doesn't justify you marrying the first drifter who came along. Watch your words, David said, his voice calm but firm. Or what? Richard challenged. What are you going to do? Nothing, David replied. I'll just ask that you treat my wife with respect. Your wife? Richard scoffed bitterly. You barely know each other. What kind of marriage is this? A real one, Jessica answered. Something I never had with Tyler. Nonsense. Tyler loved you. He just got nervous under the pressure of marriage. If he loved me, why did he run? Why didn't he have the courage to talk to me about his doubts? Richard had no good answer. Look, he said, trying a different approach. I came with an offer. Tyler wants a second chance. He's willing to marry you still if you annul this ridiculous marriage. The silence that followed was tense. Jessica looked at David, who watched the exchange with careful neutrality. And you, David, Richard said, surely you can see this would be best for everyone. You go back to your life, Jessica goes back to hers, and everyone wins. The decision isn't mine, David replied calmly. It's Jessica's. Jessica, Richard pressed. What do you say? A second chance with a man you've known for years who can give you a comfortable life. Jessica looked at Richard, then at David, then at the simple apartment they were living. Mr. Richard, she finally said, I appreciate you coming here, but the answer is no. No, just like that, without even thinking. I have thought. During the 3 years I dated Tyler, I thought a lot about our relationship, and the conclusion I reached is that he never truly loved me, and I never truly loved him either. But you have history together. You're compatible. We have history, yes, a history of a superficial relationship based on social appearances. As for compatibility, well, I think the fact that he ran away from the wedding answers that question. Richard looked at David angrily. And you? Aren't you going to say anything? Aren't you going to fight for your wife? I don't need to fight for her, David replied. She's already made her choice. This whole thing is ridiculous, Richard exploded. You'll regret this. When poverty hits, when reality sets in, you'll realize you've made a terrible mistake. Maybe, Jessica admitted, but it'll be a mistake we chose to make together. Richard stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. David and Jessica sat in silence for a few moments. Did you have doubts? David eventually asked. For a second, she admitted. Richard is right about some things. Life with Tyler would have been easier financially. And is that important to you? Not as much as I thought it was. David nodded, looking relieved. And you? Jessica asked. Were you worried I might accept his proposal? A little, he admitted. But I would have understood if you had. I can't compete with what Tyler can offer materially. David, you offer things Tyler never could. Like what? Honesty, respect, the feeling that I can be myself without fear of judgment. They sat together on the small living room couch, closer than they had been since the wedding. You know what I realized, Jessica said. For the first time in my life, I made a decision based on what I wanted, not what was expected of me. And even if it's hard, even if we make mistakes, at least I'm living my own life. And me, David said. For the first time since my parents passed, I feel like I have a family again. They looked at each other quietly for a moment. Then slowly David leaned in and gave Jessica their third kiss. This time it was on the lips, soft and tender. When they pulled apart, Jessica smiled. I think we're starting to get to know each other better. I think so too, David agreed. That night, for the first time since the wedding, they slept, closer in bed, and Jessica felt genuinely at peace with her decision. On Monday, Jessica started her new job. The accounting office was small but busy, serving several local small businesses. Mr. Mark was a fair boss, and the other employees welcomed her warmly. How was your first day? David asked when she got home. Good, I like the work. It's challenging but interesting. And the people, are they nice? Yes, there's a co-worker, Amanda, who's really sweet. She offered to help me adjust. David smiled, seeing Jessica's excitement. It was good to see her engaged and enthusiastic about something. And your day? How was it with the building residents? Quiet. Most of them are very polite. I just had to fix a leaky faucet and clean the common areas. They settled into a comfortable domestic routine. David woke up early to clean the common areas before the residents left for work. Jessica made a simple breakfast before heading to the office. In the evenings, they had dinner together and talked about their days. It was a simple life, but there was a peace in it that Jessica had never experienced with Tyler. 2 weeks after starting work, Jessica got an unexpected visit at the office. It was Amanda, her co-worker, but she looked nervous. Jessica, can I talk to you in private? They stepped out into the small courtyard behind the office. What's wrong, Amanda? You seem worried. It's about your husband, David. Jessica's stomach tightened. What about him? My boyfriend works in construction. He knows David from some jobs they did together in the past. And? Jessica, there are some things about David's past that maybe you should know. Jessica's heart began to beat faster. What kind of things? My boyfriend said David had some issues with drinking a few years ago, and that there was an incident at a job where he was accused of stealing tools. Jessica felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Is he sure he's talking about the right person? David Wilson, 28 years old, came from the countryside. After his parents passed away, it's definitely him. And the theft, was he prosecuted? No. The company decided not to pursue it because they didn't have enough evidence. But he was fired and got a bad reputation among some contractors. Jessica leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. Why are you telling me this? Because you're my friend and I'm worried. You married him so quickly. Maybe you didn't know these things. Thank you, Jessica said mechanically. Thank you for telling me. The rest of the workday passed in a haze. Jessica couldn't concentrate, her mind spinning with the information Amanda had shared. Could it be true? Had David lied about his past? And if he'd lied about this, what else had he lied about? When she got home, David was preparing dinner in the small kitchen. Hi, sweetheart, he said when he saw her. How was your day? The word sweetheart sounded strange to Jessica. Did he really care about her, or was he just pretending? David, we need to talk. He immediately noticed the seriousness in her voice. Of course, what is it? A co-worker told me some things about your past. David stopped stirring what he was cooking and turned to face her. What kind of things? About drinking problems. About you being accused of stealing tools from a job. The silence that followed was telling. David didn't deny it right away, which made Jessica's heart sink even further. Is it true? She asked. David sighed deeply and sat at the kitchen table. Some of it is true. Jessica felt her legs weaken. She sat in the chair across from him. Tell me everything, from the beginning. David ran his hands through his hair before speaking. After my parents died, I really went through a rough patch. Losing them and the farm at the same time was devastating. When I came to Denver, I felt lost, alone. I started drinking to numb the pain. A lot? Yes. For almost 2 years, I drank too much. I showed up drunk to work, missed days. I lost several jobs because of it. And the theft. That was a misunderstanding, but I get why it looked suspicious. I was working at a construction site and some tools went missing. Since I was the newest employee and had a bad reputation because of the drinking, they blamed me. Did you steal the tools? No, never. But I couldn't prove my innocence. And when did you stop drinking? 3 years ago. I had a sort of wake-up call when I woke up in a hospital after a night I don't even remember. I realized I was destroying my life and my parents' memory. Jessica absorbed all the information in silence. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I knew you wouldn't marry me if you knew, and because I didn't want my past to define our future. But it's part of who you are, David. These are important things. I know, and I was planning to tell you eventually, when we trusted each other more. How can I trust you when I find out you lied by omission? David looked directly into her eyes. Because I've changed, Jessica. I'm not the man who drank to forget the pain anymore. For the last 3 years, I've worked hard to rebuild my life and my reputation. How can I be sure of that? Because you can see how I live now. You can ask anyone who's worked with me the last 2 years. I never had any more problems with drinking or work. Jessica stood up and walked to the kitchen window. David, I married you because I thought you were honest, more honest than Tyler. And I am honest about who I am now, but you weren't honest about who you were. You're right. I should have told you. Jessica turned to face him. Is there anything else I should know, other secrets you're hiding? No, that was the only big secret from my past, and I'm supposed to believe you. I don't know, David admitted. All I can do is ask for a chance to prove I've changed. Jessica went back to the table and sat down again. David, I just found out the man I married has a past that includes alcoholism and possible theft. How do you think I feel? Betrayed, confused, angry. Exactly. And now I have to decide if I believe you've changed or if this is a pattern that's going to continue. What can I do to prove I've changed? I don't know, maybe time, maybe nothing. They ate dinner in uncomfortable silence. The harmony they had built over the past weeks had been shattered in minutes. That night, Jessica slept facing the wall, creating a physical distance between them that mirrored the emotional gap now between them. David lay awake most of the night, knowing he'd made a grave mistake by not being completely honest from the start. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, the tension between Jessica and David was palpable. They spoke only about practical matters, work, bills, chores. The ease and naturalness they had begun to develop were gone. Jessica found herself questioning David's every move, searching for signs he was still lying or hiding something. When he came home a little late from work, she wondered if he'd been drinking. When he seemed tired, she questioned whether it was from work or something else. David, for his part, desperately tried to earn back Jessica's trust. He arrived exactly on time, kept receipts for everything he bought, shared details of every conversation he had during the day. Things came to a head when Margaret came to visit a week later. "What's going on here?" she asked as soon as she stepped into the apartment. "You two look like you're at a funeral." Jessica and David exchanged glances, neither wanting to be the first to explain. "Margaret," David finally said, "I made a mistake. I didn't tell Jessica some things about my past, and now she's questioning whether she can trust me." "What kind of things?" Jessica told her mother about Amanda's revelations. Margaret listened in silence, her expression growing more serious. "Is it true?" she asked David when Jessica finished. "Yes, ma'am. The alcoholism is true. The theft accusation happened too, though I'm innocent of that. And why didn't you say this before the wedding?" "Because I knew Jessica wouldn't marry me if she knew, and because I was trying to leave my past behind." Margaret sat in the living room and stayed quiet for a long moment. "David," she finally said, "you have to understand my daughter's position. She went from a relationship where she was deceived for 3 years to a marriage where she found out she was deceived from day one." "I understand, ma'am, and I deeply regret lying by omission." "And you, Jessica?" Margaret continued, "have to decide if you believe people can change." "How can I believe that, Mom? Everything I know about him could be a lie." "Not everything," Margaret interrupted. "I've seen how he treats you. I saw how he works. I saw the respect he has for our family. Those things are hard to fake for long. But what if I'm being naive again? What if I'm repeating the same mistakes I made with Tyler? Sweetheart, the mistakes you made with Tyler were accepting things you knew were wrong. With David, you're learning things about his past you didn't know. What's the difference? The difference is that Tyler's behavior during the relationship already showed who he was. David may have lied about his past, but his behavior with you has been exemplary." Jessica looked at David, who was silently watching the conversation. "David," she said, "if we're going to stay married, I need total transparency. No omissions, no half-truths. Can you promise me that?" "I can, and I do. And if I find out you lied about anything else, our marriage ends immediately. Do you understand? I understand and accept it. And I need time to rebuild trust. It won't happen overnight. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. Margaret watched their exchange. You two were thrown into an extraordinary situation. You married without knowing each other. You're learning to live together while discovering who the other is. Mistakes will happen. The question is whether you're willing to work through them. David said without hesitation. I think so, Jessica said after a pause, but I need time. Time is what you have, Margaret said. Use it wisely. After Margaret left, Jessica and David sat down for a long, difficult talk. David shared details about his years of alcoholism, the struggles he faced, and his recovery process. Jessica asked tough questions, some painful, but David answered them all honestly. The last time I drank was 3 years and 4 months ago, he said. It was the day I woke up in the hospital. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the man I'd become. How did you stop? Was it hard? Very. The first few months were terrible. I had to learn to deal with pain and loneliness without alcohol, but I found help in a support group at the neighborhood church. Do you still go to that group? When I can. They meet Wednesday nights. And you never felt the urge to drink again? I did, especially in the first 2 years, but I developed other ways to handle stress and sadness. Like what? Physical work mostly. When I feel tempted or sad, I find something to keep me busy. That's why I love woodworking and repairs so much. Jessica took it all in, trying to form a complete picture of the man she'd married. David, do you really believe you've changed? Or just learned to control the problem? I think I learned to control it, and in the process I changed who I am. The man I was 3 years ago wouldn't have had the courage to accept your marriage proposal. He'd have been too much of a coward. And if something really bad happens to us, if we lose our jobs, get sick, face serious crises, how can I be sure you won't start drinking again? You can't be sure, David admitted. I can't even guarantee it with 100% certainty. What I can say is that in the last 3 years, I've faced financial struggles, loneliness, rejection, and I didn't drink. And now I have something very important to lose. You. That gives me even more motivation to stay sober. The conversation lasted until the early hours of the morning. When they finally went to bed, Jessica still felt uncertain, but at least she felt she knew the man she'd married a little better. In the weeks that followed, David made a conscious effort to rebuild Jessica's trust. He took her to meet some people who had worked with him over the past few years, who confirmed his reputation as a reliable and sober worker. He also took her to an alcoholism support group meeting where Jessica could see for herself David's commitment to his sobriety. How do you feel attending these meetings? She asked on the way back. Grateful, David replied. Grateful to have found people who understand what I've been through and who help me stay on the right path. And embarrassed? Sometimes. It's hard to talk about the worst moments of my life, but it's also freeing, carrying those secrets. Alone was a heavy burden. Jessica began to understand that David's alcoholism hadn't been a choice or a character flaw, but a misguided way of coping with deep trauma, and that his recovery had required considerable courage and determination. Slowly, very slowly, she began to rebuild her trust in him. The turning point came a month later, when Jessica fell ill with a bad flu. David cared for her with a devotion that moved her deeply. He missed work to stay with her, made homemade soup, brought her medicine, and read to her when she was too nauseous to watch TV. For 3 days, he was her nurse, cook, and constant companion. You don't have to do all this, she said, when she finally started feeling better. I want to, he replied. This is how you care for someone you love. It was the first time David had used the word love in relation to her. Jessica felt her heart race. You love me? She asked. David stopped organizing the medicine on the nightstand and looked at her. I do, he said simply. I know we're still getting to know each other, and I know our situation is unusual, but I love who you are. I love how you've made me feel like I'm worthy of love again. Tears began to roll down Jessica's face. David, you don't have to say you love me too, he interrupted. "I know you're still building trust in me. I just wanted you to know how I feel." I think I love you too," she said, surprising herself. "I don't know when it happened, but I look at you and see a good man who made mistakes but fought to become better. And that makes me feel safe. Loved." David leaned in and kissed her softly. It was the most meaningful kiss they had shared so far, filled with genuine emotion and real connection. When they pulled apart, Jessica smiled for the first time in weeks. "I think we're really married now," she said. "I think so," David agreed, smiling too. That night, for the first time since learning about David's past, Jessica fell asleep nestled in his arms, feeling truly at home. Several months passed, and Jessica and David settled into a comfortable, happy routine. Their work was going well. They had decorated their small apartment with furniture David had built and repaired, and they had developed a relationship based on honest communication and mutual respect. Jessica had even started occasionally attending support group meetings with David, not as a participant, but as support. She had learned a lot about addiction and recovery, which helped her better understand her husband's journey. They were saving money with the hope of eventually renting their own place, maybe even buying a small house. David had started doing freelance carpentry work on weekends, which brought in significant extra income. Everything seemed to be going well, until an unexpected visitor arrived, shaking the foundation of their still growing life. It was a Friday evening when someone knocked on the door. David opened it and found a woman he hadn't seen in years. "Rachel," he said, clearly shocked. "Hi, David," the woman replied. She was pretty, around 30 years old, with dark hair and green eyes. Her clothes suggested she was better off financially than most. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" I asked around. It wasn't hard. "Can I come in?" David hesitated, glancing at Jessica, who was watching the conversation from the living room. "Rachel, this is my wife, Jessica. Jessica, this is Rachel, an old friend." Rachel looked at Jessica with an expression that was hard to read. "Wife?" she said. "You got married when?" "A few months ago," David replied, clearly uncomfortable. "Well," Rachel said, stepping into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, "that complicates things." "What things?" Jessica asked, feeling a knot in her stomach. Rachel sat on the couch as if it were her own. "David hasn't told you. About me, has he?" "I'm not surprised. He's always been good at forgetting people when they become inconvenient." "Rachel," David said tightly, "what do you want?" "I came to share some news. We have a son." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. "What?" David whispered. "A son, 3 years old. His name is Nathan. Your eyes, your stubborn chin." Jessica looked at David, who had gone pale as a ghost. That's impossible," he stammered. "Oh, it's very possible. Remember that night 4 years ago? You were drunk. I was going through a rough patch. We ran into each other at that bar near downtown." David sank heavily into a chair, running his hands through his hair. I barely remember anything from that time. I was drinking so much. Everything was a blur. Well, I remember, and 9 months later I had Nathan." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to find you when I found out I was pregnant, but you'd moved. No one knew where you were. I decided to raise Nathan on my own." "And why are you telling us now?" Jessica asked, finally finding her voice. Rachel looked at her as if just remembering she was there. "Because Nathan's been asking about his father, and because I'm running out of money to support him alone." The implication was clear. Rachel wasn't here for a heartfelt family reunion. She was here for money. "Are you sure Nathan is David's?" Jessica asked. "Absolutely. He's the spitting image of his father." "And can you prove it?" "I can. I brought a picture." Rachel took a photo from her purse and placed it on the coffee table. David and Jessica leaned in to look. The resemblance was undeniable. The boy in the photo had the same dark eyes and face shape as David. It was like looking at a miniature version of him. "My God," David murmured. "He really does look like me." Because he's your son, Rachel confirmed. Jessica stood abruptly and walked to the kitchen. She needed a moment to process what was happening. In just a few minutes, her life had been turned upside down again. David followed her. Jessica, I swear I didn't know. How could you not know you might have gotten someone pregnant? Because I drank so much I barely remembered where I was most nights. Rachel's right, there were whole periods that were just a fog to me. And that makes it better. No, it doesn't. But it's the truth. Jessica stared out the kitchen window, trying to gather her thoughts. David, do you realize what this means? If that child really is yours, you have responsibilities, financial, emotional. I know. We can barely support ourselves. How are we supposed to support a child too? I don't know, but if Nathan is my son, I can't just ignore that. Jessica turned to face him. What about us? What about the marriage we're building? I don't know, David admitted. I don't know how to make this all work. They returned to the living room where Rachel was waiting patiently. Have you finished talking? She asked. Rachel, said David, if Nathan is really my son, of course I'll take responsibility for him, but I need time to sort out my life. Time is a luxury I don't have, she replied. I've been struggling financially for months. I need help now. What kind of help? Child support. At least 500 rials a month to start. Jessica nearly choked. 500 rials was almost half of David's salary. Rachel, she said, that's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll have to figure it out, or I'll have to find other ways to provide for my son. The implied threat was clear. Rachel was willing to go to court if necessary. Can I meet Nathan? David asked. Before we make any decisions, I'd like to get to know him. Of course, he's with my mother. I can bring him here tomorrow. No, Jessica interrupted quickly. Maybe it's better if we meet somewhere neutral, a park or something like that. Rachel smiled coldly. Sure. How about Washington Park tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon? Okay, David agreed. After Rachel left, Jessica and David sat in silence for a long time. How are you feeling? David eventually asked. Confused, angry, scared. Angry at me. Angry at the situation. Angry at Rachel for showing up out of nowhere. Angry at you for having this complicated past that keeps haunting us. I understand. David, if that child really is yours, our lives are going to change completely. We won't be able to save for our own house anymore. We won't be able to plan our future. I know, but what choice do we have? We could ask for a DNA test to be sure. And if it confirms Nathan is my son, then we'll have to figure out how to handle it. That night, neither of them slept well. Jessica lay awake thinking about how her life had gotten complicated again, just when she was starting to feel stable. The next day, they met Rachel and Nathan at the park. The boy was adorable, shy but polite, and the resemblance to David was even more obvious in person. Nathan, Rachel said, this is David. Remember I told you you'd get to meet your dad? Nathan looked at David with big, curious eyes. Are you my daddy? He asked in his small voice. David knelt to be at the boy's level. I might be. Yes, he said, clearly moved. Why didn't you ever come to see me? The innocent question broke David's heart. Because I didn't know you existed, Nathan. But now that I do, I'd really like to be your friend. Nathan smiled shyly. Can I call you Daddy? David glanced at Jessica, who was watching the interaction with a mix of complicated emotions. How about we start with David, and we'll see how things go, okay? Nathan nodded and began telling David about his favorite toys, school, and the cartoons he liked to watch. Jessica watched David interacting with the boy and saw something in him she'd never seen before. A naturalness, a genuine tenderness in the way he spoke to Nathan. He likes you, Rachel said after a while. He's an amazing boy, David replied. You've done a great job raising him. I did the best I could, but raising a child alone isn't easy, especially without financial support. Rachel, Jessica said, how about we take this slow? David can spend time with Nathan regularly, get to know him better, and we can help financially within our means. Within your means won't be enough, Rachel said coldly. Nathan needs proper support, healthcare, education. And he'll have it, David said. But it needs to be something we can sustain, long-term. If we promise more than we can deliver, we'll end up hurting Nathan. Rachel didn't seem satisfied with the answer, but agreed to meet again the following week to discuss details. On the way back home, Jessica and David walked in silence. "How are you feeling?" she eventually asked. "Confused, emotional, scared, all at once." "Do you believe he's your son?" "Yes, the resemblance is too strong, and the timeline matches. When I was drinking heavily and acting irresponsibly. And now? Now we have to figure out how to be a family, even if it's an unconventional one. Do you want to be his father?" David stopped walking. "Yes, even knowing how much this complicates our lives, yes. He's innocent in all this. He deserves to have a father present." Jessica nodded, though she knew accepting Nathan into their lives would change everything. "Then let's figure out how to make this work." The following week, David began spending regular time with Nathan. They met at the park, David took the boy for ice cream, and they played on the playground. Jessica occasionally joined them and was surprised to find she liked Nathan. He was a sweet, smart child who clearly longed for a father figure. Rachel, however, was becoming increasingly demanding. She wanted more money, more of David's time, more commitments. "She's trying to control the situation," Jessica observed after a particularly difficult meeting. "What do you mean?" "She wants you to feel guilty enough to give her everything she asks for. She's using Nathan as emotional leverage. But Nathan is my son. I have responsibilities toward him." "You do, yes. But Rachel also has responsibilities, and she can't just show up in our lives and demand we change everything to accommodate her." David considered Jessica's words. "What do you suggest?" "That we seek legal help, that we establish a formal child support and visitation agreement, something that protects Nathan, but also protects our rights and our ability to maintain a stable life." "You're right, but that'll cost money we don't have." "My parents can help. It's better to spend money on an attorney now than to be controlled by Rachel forever." Robert Miller and Margaret were shocked when they learned about Nathan, but offered to help find a fair legal solution. "What matters is the child's well-being," Robert said. "But you also have rights and need to protect them." They consulted a family law attorney who reviewed the situation and made key recommendations. "First, get a DNA test to legally confirm paternity," the attorney said. "Second, establish child support based on David's actual income, not Rachel's demands. Third, formalize a visitation schedule to ensure regular time with the child." The DNA test confirmed what everyone already knew. Nathan was David's son. With that, they proceeded with the legal agreements. Rachel wasn't happy with the court-ordered support, significantly less than she'd asked for, but had no choice but to accept. "This won't be enough," she complained. "It's what I can pay without hurting my own family," David replied firmly. "Your family?" Rachel looked at Jessica with disdain. "What kind of family is this? You barely know each other." "A family we've chosen to build together," Jessica said calmly, "based on respect and honest communication." Rachel laughed sarcastically. "Well, let's see how long this chosen family lasts when reality sets in." But contrary to Rachel's predictions, the situation with Nathan ended up strengthening the relationship between Jessica and David. They learned to communicate about difficult issues, make decisions together, and support each other in stressful moments. Jessica developed a genuine affection for Nathan, and he for her. She never tried to replace Rachel as his mother, but she became a loving maternal figure in the boy's life. David flourished in his role as a father. His gentle and patient nature made him an excellent caregiver, and Nathan clearly benefited from having a present father figure. 6 months after Rachel had appeared in their lives, Jessica and David were more united than ever. "You know what's ironic?" Jessica said one evening as they watched Nathan sleep on the living room couch. "What?" "Rachel came here thinking she would destroy our marriage, but she ended up strengthening it." "How so?" "Because we went through a real crisis together and came out stronger. We proved to ourselves that we can handle serious problems as a team." David smiled, wrapping his arm around Jessica's shoulders. "And now?" Now we keep building our life. One that includes Nathan, but is ours. Do you regret it? Marrying? Me taking on all this complication? Jessica thought carefully before answering. No, our life isn't simple, isn't easy, but it's real, it's honest, and it's our choice. I love you, David said. I love you too, Jessica replied, and I love the family we're building with all its imperfections. That night, for the first time in months, they slept soundly, knowing they had overcome another major obstacle in their unconventional marriage. However, their challenges were far from over. Life had taught them that happiness was something to be earned daily, not something that just happened, and new challenges were coming. A year had passed since Rachel's appearance, and Jessica and David had established a stable routine. Nathan spent 2 weekends a month with them, along with some afternoons during the week. The small apartment had been rearranged to accommodate the boys' visits, with a special corner for his toys and books. Jessica had been promoted at the accounting firm and now earned a better salary. David continued as a custodian, but his weekend carpentry work was growing, and he was starting to consider opening his own business. They had even begun saving again for a house of their own, though progress was slow due to Nathan's child support. Everything seemed to be going well until the morning Margaret showed up at their door, clearly distressed. "Mom," Jessica said, surprised to see her mother so early. "What's wrong? Can I come in? I need to talk to you." Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it, Mom? You're scaring me." "It's about your father. He's not well." Jessica's heart stopped. "What do you mean, not well?" "He's having memory problems. Forgets simple things. Gets confused, sometimes doesn't recognize me." David sat beside Jessica, taking her hand. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "A few months. At first I thought it was work stress, exhaustion, but it's getting worse." "Has he seen a doctor?" "This morning. The doctor wants to run more tests, but..." Margaret's voice broke. "But he suspects it might be Alzheimer's." Jessica felt the world spin around her. Her father, always so strong and present, facing a disease that would gradually steal everything he was. "Are you sure?" she asked, though she knew it was a foolish question. "Not yet, but all the signs are there. The confusion, the forgetfulness, the moments when he gets lost in his own home." Jessica began to cry. David pulled her into a hug, while Margaret kept talking. "I don't know what to do. He's still working, but I don't know for how much longer. And I don't know if I'll be able to take care of him alone if the disease progresses." "You won't be alone," Jessica said immediately. "We'll help. Sweetheart, you have your own responsibilities. Nathan, your jobs, your lives." "Dad is family," Jessica said firmly. "He's the priority." David nodded in agreement. "Margaret, we'll figure it out. Whatever Robert Miller needs, we'll help." Margaret started crying too. "I'm so scared. Scared of losing him little by little, scared of not being able to take care of him, scared of the future." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, each processing the implications of the news. "Mom," Jessica finally said, "what kind of help will you need?" "Right now, just emotional support. But if the disease progresses, he might need full-time care. He could get confused, agitated, might not be able to take care of himself. And financially, the health insurance will cover some of the medical costs. But if he has to stop working, our resources are limited." Jessica looked at David, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Mom, if it comes to it, you can come live with us, or we can move in with you to help." "Sweetheart, your apartment barely has room for the two of you." "Then we'll find a bigger place, or sell the house and find something that works for all of us." Margaret looked at David. "And you, David. Do you agree with this? Taking care of sick in-laws wasn't exactly what you signed up for when you married my daughter." David took Margaret's hand. "Margaret, when I married Jessica, it wasn't just her, it was her family too. Robert Miller welcomed me as a son, treated me with dignity when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to give back." "But you're barely making ends meet as it is. With Nathan, the bills..." "We'll figure it out," Jessica interrupted. "We always..." "Too?" Margaret nodded, clearly relieved not to have to face the situation alone. "The test results will be in next week. Then we'll know better what we're dealing with." After Margaret left, Jessica and David sat quietly in the kitchen. "Our life is never simple, is it?" Jessica said eventually. "No, but at least it's not boring." "David, are you sure you can handle this? Taking care of a father-in-law with Alzheimer's it's really hard. It could take years. It could be emotionally devastating. I'm sure, and you?" "I'm scared," Jessica admitted. "Scared of watching my dad disappear little by little. Scared of not being able to help him. Scared of what this will do to our family." Fear is normal, but fear won't stop us from doing what's right. That week, the tests confirmed what everyone feared. Robert Miller was in the early stages of Alzheimer's. The doctor explained that the progression of the disease was unpredictable. Some people deteriorated quickly. Others remained functional for years. The important thing now is to keep him active, engaged in a familiar environment, the neurologist explained. Drastic changes in routine could speed up the confusion. "Does that mean he can keep working for now?" Margaret asked. "Maybe for a few months, but you'll need to monitor him closely. When he starts getting confused with familiar tasks, it'll be time to stop." Jessica and David took a more active role in their parents' lives. They started visiting them almost every day after work, helping with chores and making sure Robert took his prescribed medication. Nathan, who now spent more time with them, was also included in the visits. The boy developed a special fondness for his adoptive grandfather, who always had time to play and tell stories. "Grandpa David is getting forgetful," Nathan observed one day. "That's true," Jessica confirmed. "That's why we need to have extra patience with him. Like when I was little and forgot where I put my toys." "Sort of like that. But Grandpa David won't remember better over time." Nathan nodded with the seriousness only children can muster. "Then I'll help him remember." And he did, in simple but meaningful ways. He reminded Robert Miller to take his medicine, helped find lost objects, and repeated important information with the endless patience of a child. 2 months after the diagnosis, the situation became more complicated when Robert got lost on his way home from work. Margaret called Jessica in a panic. "He left the office at 5 like always, but he never made it home. It's almost 9 o'clock." Jessica and David immediately went out to search for him. They found Robert sitting on a bus bench just a few blocks from home, clearly confused. "Dad," Jessica said gently, "what are you doing here?" "Jessica?" He looked at her as if trying to remember something important. "I was coming home from work, but I couldn't remember which bus to take." "It's okay, sir," David said. "Let's get you home." On the way back, Robert stayed silent. When they got home, he sat in his favorite armchair and began to cry. "I'm losing my mind," he said. "I'm becoming a burden to you all." "Don't ever say that," Margaret replied, kneeling beside the chair. "You could never be a burden." "But it's true. I can't even do simple things anymore. Today I forgot how to get home. How can I keep working if I can't even find my way back?" It was a question everyone had been avoiding. The incident made it clear Robert could no longer work on his own. "Maybe it's time to think about retirement," Jessica suggested gently. "With what money? The pension I'll get won't even cover medical expenses." It was true. Robert's pension would be much smaller than his current salary, and Alzheimer's medications were expensive. "We'll help," David said, "whatever it takes." "How?" "You already have Nathan to support, and you can barely save for your own house." "We'll figure it out," Jessica insisted. "Family takes care of family, but finding a solution wouldn't be easy." In the following days, Jessica and David met to go over their finances and see how they could help his parents. "If we sell your parents' house and buy something bigger, for all of us we could split the costs," David suggested. "But the house isn't worth much in today's market, and finding something bigger in our price range will be hard. What if I take on more carpentry work, nights and weekends?" "David, you already work so much, and Nathan needs time with you." They settled on a temporary solution. Jessica would take on some freelance accounting work at night, and David would increase his carpentry jobs. It would be exhausting, but it would help his parents financially. The solution worked for a few months, but it put enormous strain on their marriage. Jessica was always tired, working late into the night. David spent entire weekends working, leaving little time for Nathan and his wife. The tension reached its breaking point one Friday evening when Jessica came home and found Nathan crying in the living room. "What happened?" she asked, worried. "David yelled at me," Nathan said between sobs. "Yelled how?" "I wanted to help him with the wood, but he shouted that I was in the way." Jessica found David in the garage, working furiously on a piece of furniture. "David, Nathan said you yelled at him. He was messing with the tools, he could have gotten hurt, but he just wanted to help." "Jessica, I'm trying to finish this piece of furniture to deliver tomorrow. I don't have time to pay attention to Nathan right now. He's your son." "And you think I don't know that?" David snapped. "You think it's easy working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week to support everyone? No one asked you to work that much." "Oh, really? Then how do we help your parents? How do we take care of Nathan? How do we save for a house?" "I don't know, but not at the cost of tearing our family apart." David stopped working and looked at her. "Our family? Jessica, when was the last time we talked about something other than money or problems? When was the last time we had dinner together? When was the last time we had 5 minutes just for us?" Jessica realized he was right. Over the past few weeks, they had become housemates sharing responsibilities, not husband and wife. "David, I'm tired, Jessica. Tired of working non-stop, tired of worrying about money, tired of feeling like it's never enough." "What are you saying?" "Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe our chosen family isn't strong enough to hold up when reality gets tough." The words hit Jessica like a slap. "Are you thinking of giving up? On us?" David let out a deep sigh. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep going like this." Jessica felt tears burning in her eyes. "Then what do we do?" "I don't know," David repeated. "Honestly, I don't know." That night, they slept on opposite sides of the bed with an emotional chasm between them. Nathan stayed quiet during dinner, clearly sensing the tension between the adults. The next day, when David left to deliver the furniture, Jessica sat down with Nathan. "Nathan, you know David loves you very much, right?" "He didn't seem to love me yesterday. Sometimes adults get really tired and stressed and they end up saying things they don't mean. Like when I get mad and yell at you? Exactly like that. And you always forgive me. Always. So can I forgive David too?" "Of course you can." Nathan seemed satisfied with the explanation, but Jessica knew things between her and David wouldn't be resolved so easily. When David returned, she was waiting for him. "We need to talk," she said. "I know." They sat in the living room, Nathan playing quietly in his corner. "David, yesterday you said you didn't know if you could keep going like this. What exactly does that mean?" "It means we're working ourselves to death and still can't solve all our problems. Your parents need more help than we can give. Nathan needs more attention. Our relationship is suffering. And what's the solution? Maybe we need to accept that we can't do everything, that we can't save everyone." "Are you suggesting we abandon my parents?" "I'm suggesting maybe we need to find other options. Specialized care homes, professional caregivers, something that doesn't depend on us performing financial miracles." Jessica felt anger rising inside her. "My parents took me in when you had nowhere to live. They supported me when I made the crazy decision to marry you, and now you want me to abandon them? I don't want you to abandon them. I want you to be realistic about what we can and can't do. What if it were Nathan? If he needed special care, would you also tell me to be realistic? That's different." "How is it different? Because he's your blood? Because Nathan is a child. Your parents are adults who had a whole lifetime to prepare for old age. No one prepares for Alzheimer's, David." The argument was interrupted by Nathan, who walked up to them. "Are you fighting because of me?" he asked in a small voice. "No, son," David said immediately. "It's not because of you. But I heard you talking about me." Jessica knelt beside Nathan. "Nathan, sometimes adults have difficult conversations about how to solve problems. That doesn't mean someone did something wrong. Are you going to separate?" The innocent question hit both Jessica and David hard. "No," Jessica said quickly. "We're going to work through our problems." "Promise?" Jessica looked at David, who gave a slight nod. "We promise." After Nathan went back to playing, David, and Jessica continued talking in lower tones. "Look," David said, "I don't want to abandon your parents. I just think we need to be more strategic about how we help them. What do you have in mind? How about we talk to a social worker, someone who knows about resources available for families in our situation?" "That makes sense. And maybe we need to cut back on our extra jobs. There's no point in making more money if it destroys our family. But how will we help my parents without the extra income? We'll find other ways. Maybe your parents qualify for some kind of assistance. Maybe there are support programs we don't know about." Jessica nodded, feeling a little more hopeful. "What about us? How do we fix our relationship?" "We go back to basics, family dinners, conversations that aren't just about problems, time together without distractions." "And no work on Friday nights?" "Friday nights are sacred," David agreed. They hugged, feeling they'd found their way back to each other. The following week, they met with a social worker specializing in elderly care. The meeting was eye-opening. "There are several resources available that you may not know about," explained the social worker, Dr. Lauren. "Adult day centers for people with Alzheimer's, support groups for families, financial assistance programs for medications." "How does the day center work?" Margaret asked. "Your husband would spend part of the day in a structured environment with activities designed for people with dementia. It would give you a break during the day and provide mental stimulation for him." "Is it very expensive?" "There are income-based subsidized programs. In your situation, you'd likely qualify for assistance." It was exactly the kind of information they needed. Instead of trying to handle everything alone, they could access a professional support network. "What about in-home care?" Jessica asked. "There are professional caregivers who can help a few hours a week. Again, there are assistance programs for families who can't afford full costs." Margaret began to cry. "Why didn't anyone tell me about these options before?" "Unfortunately, many families don't know these resources exist. You did the right thing by seeking help." In the following weeks, the family's life changed significantly. Robert Miller started attending the day center 3 times a week, participating in cognitive stimulation activities and socializing with others in similar situations. A professional caregiver, Mark, began helping Margaret 2 afternoons a week, giving her time to rest or focus on other tasks. With this support system in place, Jessica and David were able to significantly reduce their extra work. Jessica kept only a few freelance accounting clients, and David limited his carpentry work to weekends. "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked Margaret during a visit. "Better, much better. It's still hard watching Robert decline, but I don't feel so alone anymore, and he seems to like the day center." "How is he responding to the activities?" "There? Most days, well. There are bad days when he gets confused about where he is or why he's there. But professionals know how to handle that." "And you? How are you taking care of yourself?" "Better too. The support group for family members has been really helpful. Talking to other people going through the same situation makes me feel less alone." Jessica Miller felt relieved to see her mother more at ease. Over the last few weeks, she had noticed how the full responsibility of caring for Robert Miller was wearing Margaret down. With her parents' situation more stable, Jessica and David could focus on rebuilding their own relationship. They reinstated distraction-free family dinners, evening walks after Nathan went to bed when he was with them, and conversations about things other than family problems. "You know what I realized?" Jessica said one night as they strolled through the neighborhood. "What?" "That over the past few months we became so focused on solving problems that we forgot to live." "That's true. We were always chasing after some crisis. And now we still have problems, but at least we have help dealing with them, and time to be a couple, not just a crisis management team." They stopped at a bench in the small neighborhood square. "David, I want to apologize to you." "For what?" "For putting so much pressure on you to handle everything alone, for expecting you to work like crazy to keep everyone happy." "Jessica, you didn't ask for that. I put that pressure on myself. But I didn't object when you started working 12-hour days. In fact, I was relieved because it meant we could help my parents. And I didn't talk about how I was feeling until I reached my breaking point. We both made mistakes. How do we avoid repeating them?" Communication. When one of us feels overwhelmed, we speak up right away. We don't wait until we're at our limit. And boundaries. We set limits on how much we can help others without hurting our own family. Exactly. They kissed on the park bench under the streetlights. It was the first truly romantic kiss they'd shared in months. Things were finally settling down when Rachel reappeared in their lives with another bombshell. It was a Thursday evening when she showed up at the door, but this time she wasn't alone. A man stood with her, tall, well-dressed, with a serious expression. "Rachel," David said, clearly surprised, "what are you doing here?" "We need to talk. This is my attorney, Attorney James Cooper." Jessica felt a chill of fear. Rachel had brought a lawyer. This couldn't be good. "About what?" Jessica asked. "About Nathan and about his future." They sat in the small living room, the tension thick. "What's going on, Rachel?" David asked. "I'm getting married," she announced, "to a wonderful man who wants to adopt Nathan and give us a better life." David and Jessica exchanged glances. This was good for Nathan, wasn't it? "That's great," David said carefully. "Nathan deserves to have a stable father figure." "Yes, he does. That's why I'm here. My fiancée wants to legally adopt Nathan, but for that, we need you to relinquish your parental rights." The room fell completely silent. "What?" David whispered. "You heard me. We want you to legally give up your rights as Nathan's father." "That's ridiculous," Jessica said. "Nathan loves David. David loves Nathan. Why would you do this?" Attorney James Cooper spoke for the first time. "Because it's what's best for the child. My client can offer Nathan financial stability, quality education, a secure future. Things that, frankly, you can't provide." "We provide love," David shot back. "We provide presence, affection, attention." "Love doesn't pay for private school," Rachel said coldly. "Love doesn't guarantee college. Love doesn't give financial security. And money can't replace a biological father." "Who loves his child?" Jessica replied. "Look around," Rachel said, gesturing to the small apartment. "Do you really think you can give Nathan what he deserves? You can barely support yourselves." "Our financial situation has improved," David said, "and it will keep getting better. Slowly, gradually, maybe." Rachel leaned forward. "My fiancé is an executive at a multinational company. He can give Nathan opportunities you'll never be able to." "Nathan doesn't need opportunities. He needs family," Jessica insisted. "He will have a family, a stable one with resources." Attorney Cooper opened his briefcase. "If you voluntarily agree to relinquish your parental rights, the process will be simple and quick. If you refuse, we'll have to go to court and argue. What's in the child's best interest?" "And you think you'd win?" Jessica asked. "I believe so. David has a history of alcoholism. You have limited financial means, and the child would clearly be better off in a more stable environment." David stood abruptly. "Get out of my house." "David," Rachel began. "Get out," he shouted. "You're not taking my son." "He's not just your son," Rachel shot back. "He's mine too. And as his mother, I have the right to do what's best for him." "What's best for him is having a father and mother who love him. What's best for him is security and opportunities." Attorney Cooper stood calmly. "You have a week to consider our offer. After that, we'll file a petition." Once they left, David and Jessica sat in shock. "Can they do that?" Jessica asked. "Can they take Nathan from you?" "I don't know. I hope not. We need a lawyer. With what money? We can barely pay our own bills." Jessica thought quickly. "My parents. They could lend us money for a lawyer." "Jessica, your parents are already struggling with your father's illness. We can't add more financial pressure on them. But if we do nothing, you could lose Nathan." David sank onto the couch, burying his head in his hands. Maybe Rachel is right. Maybe Nathan would be better off with a family that can give him everything he needs. "David, don't say that. Look at our life, Jessica. We barely have money for ourselves. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment where Nathan doesn't even have his own room. We can't afford private school, premium healthcare, vacations, all the things an executive can provide. But we can give love. We can give presents. We can give him a family. Is that enough? It should be. But both knew that in the legal system, love wasn't always considered enough. The next day, they reached out again to social worker Dr. Lauren, who connected them with a family law attorney offering free consultations for low-income families. Attorney William Harrison was a middle-aged man with extensive custody experience. "Your situation is complicated," he admitted after hearing their story. Rachel has some points in her favor. She's the biological mother, she can offer better financial stability through her new marriage, and David has a history of alcoholism, even if it's in the past. "But Nathan loves David," Jessica said. "Doesn't that matter?" "It does, but courts also consider what's called the best interest of the child in practical terms. Education, healthcare, financial stability. So we don't stand a chance?" David asked. "I didn't say that. You also have strengths. David has been a present father for over a year, Nathan has an established bond with you, and there's value in maintaining existing family ties. What do we need to do?" "First, document everything. Every moment David has spent with Nathan, photos, records of activities together. Second, obtain testimonies from people who can attest to the positive relationship between David and Nathan. Third, show that his financial situation, though modest, is stable and adequate for raising a child. And if that's not enough, then we fight in court and let the judge decide." In the following weeks, David and Jessica worked frantically to gather evidence of the positive relationship between David and Nathan. They organized photos of shared activities, obtained recommendation letters from neighbors and acquaintances, and carefully documented all interactions. Nathan, unaware of the legal battle unfolding around him, continued to visit regularly, clearly happy in his routine with David and Jessica. "Nathan," Jessica said carefully during one of his visits, "do you like coming here?" "I love it. David teaches me cool things and you make the best food. And if you could choose where you want to live?" "I want to live with you and David and Mom and Grandpa and Grandma all together in a giant house." The innocence of the answer broke Jessica's heart. Nathan didn't understand that their families were in conflict, that adults were fighting over his future as if he were property. 2 weeks before the court hearing, they received more troubling news. Rachel had hired a private investigator to dig up any information she could use against David. They found out about the stolen tools incident, attorney William Harrison informed them, and they got testimonies from some former co-workers about his period of alcoholism. "But that was years ago," Jessica protested. "David has completely changed." "I know, and we have evidence of that too. But Rachel will try to paint a picture of instability and unreliability. How can we counter that? With even stronger evidence of change and stability. I need you to get more testimonies, especially from people who knew David both in the past and present." David sighed deeply. "Doctor, I want you to be honest with me. What are our real chances?" Attorney Harrison hesitated before answering. "Honestly, 50-50. It will depend a lot on the judge, the impression Rachel and her fiancé make, and how convincingly we can present the change in David's life." It wasn't the odds they had hoped to hear. The night before the hearing, David and Jessica stayed up late, reviewing their strategy and trying to prepare emotionally for what might be David's last day as Nathan's legal father. "If we lose," David said, "I want you to know these months with Nathan have been the best of my life." "We won't lose," Jessica insisted. We can't. But if we do, we fight to stay in touch. Even if David isn't legally his father, he can still be a presence in Nathan's life. Rachel would never allow that. Then we find ways. Nathan will grow up and one day be able to make his own decisions about who he wants in his life. It was slim consolation, but it was all they had. The hearing took place in a small formal room at the city courthouse. Rachel and her fiancé, Jonathan, were impeccably dressed. Jonathan was exactly as Jessica had imagined, successful, confident, clearly able to provide every material advantage a child could want. The judge, Judge Thomas Richardson, was a serious man in his 60s, known for his careful approach in cases involving children. "This is a difficult case," he began, "because it involves a child who has established bonds with both parties, but it also involves questions of stability and the future." Attorney James Cooper, Rachel's lawyer, spoke first. He painted a picture of David as an unstable former alcoholic with a questionable past, living in modest conditions, unable to provide the opportunities Nathan deserved. Nathan is only 4 years old, he argued. If the adoption happens now, he'll grow up thinking of Jonathan as his father. He'll have all the advantages of a stable, prosperous family. He won't suffer the uncertainties of financial instability. Then it was attorney William Harrison's turn to defend David. Your Honor, this case isn't about money. It's about love, presence, and family bonds. David may not be the wealthiest man in this room, but he's a devoted father who completely turned his life around when he discovered he had a son. Attorney Harrison presented photo after photo of David and Nathan together, read letters from neighbors and acquaintances testifying to David's character, and called witnesses who spoke about the transformation they'd seen in his life. It's true David struggled with alcohol in the past, he admitted, but that was before he became a father. Since Nathan came into his life, David has been a model of responsibility and dedication. The most touching moment came when Attorney Harrison played a video of Nathan playing with David, clearly comfortable and happy in his presence. "This child loves this man," he said, "and this man loves this child." Wealth can be built, opportunities can be found, but genuine family bonds are rare and precious. Judge Richardson then spoke directly to Rachel and Jonathan. "Mrs. Rachel, why do you believe it would be better for Nathan to have David completely out of his life?" "Because confusion about paternity can be harmful to a child. If Jonathan is going to be his father, it's best that it's clearly established without other influences." "And you, Jonathan, what's your position on David maintaining some kind of relationship with Nathan?" Jonathan stood calmly. "Your Honor, I want what's best for Nathan. If in the future, when he's older, he wants to meet his biological father, I wouldn't oppose it. But for now, I believe it would be better for him to have clarity about who his family is." Next, the judge spoke to David. "Mr. David, how would you respond to the claims about your financial stability and your past with alcohol?" David stood, clearly nervous but determined. "Your Honor, I can't deny my past. I drank too much, made mistakes, went through a very difficult time in my life. But I got sober before I even knew Nathan existed. When I found out I had a son, it gave me even more motivation to be the best person I can be." "And what about the financial concerns?" "It's true I can't give Nathan all the material advantages Jonathan can, but I can give him unconditional love, constant presence, and the knowledge that he's loved for who he is, not for what he might become. If the court rules in favor of the adoption, how would you react?" David hesitated, clearly wrestling with intense emotions. "I'd be devastated, but if it's truly best for Nathan, I'd try to accept it. Because real love sometimes means letting go." The answer clearly impressed the judge. Finally, Judge Richardson addressed Jessica. "Mrs. Jessica, you're not Nathan's biological mother, nor are you being considered for adoption. Why do you have an interest in this case?" "Because Nathan is part of our family. Because when I married David, I accepted all the responsibilities and joys that come with being his wife, including being Nathan's stepmother." "How do you see Nathan's future?" "I see a child loved by many people, by Rachel, by David, by me, by my parents who consider him their grandson. I see a child who should have access to all that love, not be forced to choose between families." "Do you believe a solution that preserves Nathan's relationship with both families would be possible?" "I believe so if all the adults involved prioritize Nathan's well-being over their own desires." The judge then announced he needed time to consider all the evidence and arguments presented. "This court will reconvene in 1 week for the final decision." It was the longest week of David's life. He continued his normal routine: work, caring for Nathan during his regular visits, helping his in-laws, but he was clearly distressed. Nathan, fortunately, remained unaware of the gravity of the situation. To him, it was just another normal week of splitting time between his mother and David. "David is sad," Nathan observed during one of his visits. "Why do you think that?" Jessica asked. "He doesn't smile as much, and sometimes I see him looking at me with wet eyes." "David loves you very much," Jessica said. "Sometimes adults get sad because they love so deeply. Like when I get sad when Mom leaves for work? Exactly like that." The night before the final decision, David and Jessica sat down to dinner in silence. "Whatever happens, tomorrow," David eventually said, "I want you to know I don't regret a thing, marrying you, meeting Nathan, trying to be his father." "David, let me finish. If we lose tomorrow, it'll be hard, really hard. But we'll get through it together, and if we win, well, we'll keep building our strange and wonderful family. Win or lose, we're together," Jessica agreed. They embraced, knowing the next day would determine the course of their lives. The courtroom was even more tense at the second hearing. Rachel and Jonathan sat on one side, David and Jessica on the other, with Nathan unaware his future was being decided. Judge Richardson entered with a solemn expression. "This has been one of the most difficult cases I've presided over," he began, "because there are no villains here, only adults who love a child and believe they know what's best for him." He paused before continuing. "After carefully considering all the evidence and testimonies presented, I've reached a decision." The room fell completely silent. "While I acknowledge Jonathan can offer significant financial advantages to Nathan, I believe the established relationship between David and Nathan is valuable and should be preserved." David felt his heart stop. "Therefore, I will not approve the termination of parental rights. David will remain Nathan's legal father." Rachel stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this isn't fair. My son deserves—" "Mrs. Rachel," the judge interrupted, "your concern for Nathan's well-being is evident and commendable, but separating a child from a loving and present father is not the solution. What about Nathan's future? His education, his opportunities? Regarding that, I have a suggestion. This court encourages all parties to consider an expanded co-parenting agreement." "What does that mean?" Attorney William asked. "It means Nathan can benefit from the love and resources of both families. Jonathan can be present in Nathan's life as a stepfather, offering guidance and support. David remains the biological father with all rights and responsibilities, and everyone works together to give Nathan the best of both worlds." "What if Rachel doesn't agree?" David asked. "Then we'll maintain the current custody arrangement, with David retaining regular visitation rights and paying child support as previously established." Rachel and Jonathan whispered among themselves for a few minutes. Finally, Rachel stood. "Your Honor, we need time to consider this proposal." "Understandable. You have 2 weeks to reach an agreement. If you cannot, we will maintain the current status quo." When they left the courtroom, David was emotionally exhausted but relieved. "It's not over yet," Jessica reminded him. "Rachel might just reject the co-parenting proposal." "I know, but at least Nathan won't be taken away from me." "And if Rachel accepts co-parenting? How would you feel about sharing Nathan with Jonathan?" "I don't know," David admitted. "It would be hard, but if it meant Nathan would have access to more opportunities, maybe it would be worth it." The following week, Attorney William Harrison called with news. "Rachel and Jonathan want to meet with you to discuss the terms of co-parenting. They accepted the proposal. They're seriously considering it, but they want to set some conditions." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a neutral location, a downtown coffee shop. Nathan stayed with Jessica's grandparents, unaware of the negotiations about his future. Rachel and Jonathan arrived right on time, looking more relaxed than during the court hearings. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Rachel said. "Jonathan, and I have talked a lot about the judge's proposal." "And?" David asked. "We think it could work, but with some conditions." Jonathan spoke for the first time in a more conciliatory tone than before. "David, I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to replace you in Nathan's life, but I also want to be more than just his mother's boyfriend. What are you proposing? A real co-parenting arrangement. Nathan spends time with you, keeping the relationship you already have, but he also spends time with us, participating in activities I can provide, educational trips, private school, sports lessons." "And what would my role be in that?" David asked. "You'd still be the biological father with all the rights. I'd become an additional father figure. 2 families working together to give Nathan the best possible future." Jessica leaned forward. "What about major decisions? School, health, discipline?" "They'd be made together," Rachel said. The four of us responsible for Nathan, me, Jonathan, David, and you. You'd include me in the decisions? Jessica asked, surprised. You're David's wife and clearly love Nathan. It would be foolish not to include you. David considered the proposal carefully. And the financial side, how would that work? Jonathan would cover the bigger expenses. Education, health insurance, special activities. You'd keep paying. The court-ordered child support for daily expenses. That seems fair, David admitted. But how do we make sure it works in practice? That there won't be jealousy or competition. By setting clear rules from the start, Jonathan said, and always remembering that the goal is Nathan's well-being, not our egos. Rachel spoke directly to David. David, I know we started off on the wrong foot. I was desperate financially when I came back into your life, and I think I used Nathan as leverage. That wasn't fair to you or him. Why the change of heart now? Because I saw how Nathan reacted during the court process. He was confused, anxious even without fully understanding what was happening. I realized fighting over him was hurting him, Jonathan added, and because I've heard how he talks about you, the love he has for you is real. It would be cruel to take that away because of my pride. Jessica looked at David. What do you think? I think it could work. It'll take a lot of effort from all of us, but Nathan would be the one who benefits most. So you're willing to try? Rachel asked. Yes, David replied, but with one condition of mine. What? If at any point Nathan shows he's confused or unhappy with the arrangement, we stop and reassess. His emotional well-being comes before any other benefit. I completely agree, Jonathan said. They spent the rest of the afternoon working out the details of the agreement. Nathan would spend 2 weeks each month with Rachel and Jonathan, and 2 weeks with David and Jessica. Important decisions would be made together. Everyone committed to communicating openly about matters involving Nathan. When they finally told Nathan about the new arrangement, he was confused at first. So now I have 2 dads, he asked. You have a biological father who is David, Rachel explained carefully, and you'll have a stepfather who is Jonathan. And both will take care of you and love you. Like Alex at school, he has a dad, a mom, a stepdad, and a stepmom, exactly like Alex at school. And they all love me? We all love you very much, David confirmed. Nathan smiled. So now, I have a super big family. His innocence made all the adults laugh, easing the tension of the situation. In the following months, the new arrangement had its challenges. There were moments of jealousy when Nathan excitedly talked about special activities he'd done with Jonathan. There was logistical confusion about schedules and responsibilities. There were disagreements about discipline decisions. But there were also unexpected successes. Nathan thrived with the attention and resources of 2 loving families. He started swimming lessons sponsored by Jonathan, but learned basic woodworking with David. He had access to quality education, but also learned the values of hard work and simplicity. How are you feeling about all this? Jessica asked David 6 months later. Good, better than I expected. Jonathan is a good man, and Nathan is clearly happy. No jealousy? Sometimes. When Nathan tells me about amazing trips he took with Jonathan or expensive things he got, but then he shows me the wooden toy he made with me or tells me how he taught Jonathan to make sandwiches the way I do, and I realize I have my own special place in his life. And Rachel? How's your relationship with her? Much better. I think when we stopped competing for Nathan and started collaborating for him, we realized we really want the same thing, for him to be happy and well cared for. The co-parenting worked better than anyone had expected. Nathan adapted naturally to having 2 homes, 2 families, 2 sources of love and support. 2 years later, when Nathan turned 6, all 4 parental figures organized a birthday party together. Watching Nathan run around among them, clearly loved and secure, David realized that sometimes the best solutions were the ones no one had planned. You know what I've learned, David said to Jessica as they watched Nathan blow out the candles. What? That family isn't about biology, or money or perfect situations. It's about people who choose to love and care for each other, even when it's hard. Like our crazy family. exactly like our crazy family. But life still had more surprises in store for them. 3 years after the wedding, when Nathan was 7 and the situation with Jessica's parents had stabilized, Jessica discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a complete shock. They hadn't been trying to conceive, but they also hadn't been actively preventing it. "Pregnant," David repeated when she shared the news. 6 weeks, according to the doctor. David sat heavily on the bed. Wow, a baby. Our baby. "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked nervously. "Scared, excited, confused, all at once." "At least we have experience with kids now with Nathan." "True, but Nathan came to us already formed. Her baby is starting from scratch." "Do you want this baby?" Jessica asked directly. David looked her in the eyes. "Yes, very much. I'm scared about how we'll handle it financially, how it'll affect our dynamic with Nathan, but yes, I really do." "Me too." They hugged, feeling a mix of joy and anxiety about the future. Telling Nathan turned out to be surprisingly easy. "So I'm going to have a little brother or sister?" he asked excitedly. "Yes, in a few months." "And will he live here with you?" "Yes." "Can I teach him things?" "Of course you can." Nathan beamed at the idea of being a big brother. Rachel and Jonathan also reacted positively to the news. "Nathan is thrilled," Rachel said. "He hasn't stopped talking about the baby." "How do you feel about it?" Jessica asked. "It'll change our family dynamic." "For the better, I think," Jonathan said. "Nathan will learn responsibility by helping with a baby, and it'll strengthen his bond with you." Jessica's parents were moved by the news. Robert Miller, despite the progression of his illness, had moments of clarity and joy when they talked about the baby. "My first biological grandchild," he said during a lucid moment. "Margaret, we're going to be grandparents." "We already are grandparents to Nathan," Margaret gently reminded him. "That's true, but now we'll be grandparents twice over." The pregnancy progressed without major complications. Jessica continued working until the 8th month, and David took on extra carpentry jobs to supplement their income and prepare for the baby's expenses. Nathan was actively involved in the preparations. He helped paint the nursery, picked out some toys, and even tried talking to the baby through Jessica's belly. "Hi, baby," he'd say, pressing his face against her stomach. "I'm your brother, Nathan. I'll take care of you." When Jessica went into labor in the early hours of a March morning, the whole family mobilized. Margaret stayed with Nathan. David accompanied Jessica to the hospital, and even Rachel and Jonathan offered to help however they could. Emma Grace was born at 6 in the morning after a relatively quick labor. When David held her for the first time, tears streamed down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's our daughter," Jessica said, still emotional from the delivery. "Our daughter." Nathan was the first visitor, brought by Margaret a few hours later. "She's so tiny," he exclaimed when he saw his sister. "Can I hold her?" With the adult's help, Nathan carefully cradled Emma Grace. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. "I'm your big brother. I'll always protect you." The scene brought tears to everyone's eyes. In the first few months after Emma's birth, the house was chaotic. Sleepless nights, routines completely upended. Nathan adjusting to sharing attention with a baby sister. There were tough moments. Nathan had bouts of jealousy when Emma cried and got all the attention. Jessica struggled with mild postpartum depression. David felt overwhelmed trying to balance work, the baby, Nathan, and helping his in-laws. "I'm exhausted," Jessica confessed one night after a particularly difficult crying spell from Emma. "I can't remember the last time I slept 3 hours straight. I know I'm tired too, but it'll get better. When? I don't know, but it will." Extended family support was crucial. Margaret helped during the day when she could. Rachel took Nathan out for activities when he got restless, and Jonathan even offered to hire a babysitter for a few hours a week to give the parents a break. "We don't need a babysitter," Jessica said at first. "Jessica," David interjected, "accept the help. It's not a sign of weakness." "But it's so expensive." "It's our gift," Jonathan said. "Nathan also benefits when you're rested and happy." Slowly, They found a new balance. Emma settled into a more predictable routine. Nathan adapted to his role as big brother, proud to help with simple tasks like fetching diapers or singing to his sister. 1 year after Emma's birth, the family had found their new normal. It was a complex family, David and Jessica as the main couple, Nathan splitting his time between two homes, Emma as the radiant center that united everyone, and the grandparents offering unconditional love and support. "You know what's funny?" Jessica said one night as she put Emma to sleep. "What?" "5 years ago, I was being left at the altar by a man I'd known for 3 years. Now I'm married to a man I met for 5 minutes. We have 2 kids and a family that includes exes and stepdads. And do you regret any of it?" "No, not one bit. Our life is complicated, sometimes chaotic, but it's real. It's ours, and full of love, and full of love." But life still had one last big surprise in store for them. When Emma turned 2 and Nathan 9, Robert Miller made a decision that caught the whole family off guard. "I want to sell the house," he announced during a family Sunday gathering. "What?" said Margaret, clearly shocked. "Why?" "Because I can't take care of a house anymore. I forget to pay bills, I get confused with maintenance, I can't drive anymore, and you're wearing yourself out trying to take care of me and the house at the same time. But this has been our home for 20 years, and it's been a good home, but now we need something different." Robert had planned everything during the moments of clarity he still had. "I want to sell the house and use the money to buy something bigger for all of us. A place where Margaret doesn't have to take care of me alone, where the kids have more space, where we can be a real family." Jessica looked at David, then at her mother. "Dad, this is a huge decision. Are you?" "Sure, I am. In the coming years, I'll need more care. Margaret will need more support. The kids will need more space. It makes sense to pool our resources and efforts. But finding a house that fits all of us..." "I've already been looking," Robert interrupted, surprising everyone. "There's a 4-bedroom house in the next neighborhood. It needs some work, but it's within our budget if we combine the money from selling our house with what you two can contribute." David leaned forward. "Sir, are you suggesting we all live together permanently?" "I am, if you want to." The silence that followed was thoughtful, not uncomfortable. "It would be like the old days," Margaret said eventually, "when big families lived together and helped each other. And it would be good for the kids," Jessica added. "Nathan would have more stability. Emma would grow up with her grandparents around." "And what about us?" David asked. "As a couple, having privacy, our own space." "The house has a separate suite on the ground floor," Robert said. "It would be perfect for you two. And the backyard is big enough for me to build a woodworking shop for David." "You've thought of everything," Jessica observed. "I've had a lot of time to think, and a lot of motivation to find a solution that works for everyone." In the following days, they visited the house Robert had found. It was a 2-story home, well built but needing updates. It had a spacious backyard, 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and the potential to be perfect for an extended family. "We can make this work," David said after inspecting the structure. "With some work, it could be exactly what we need." "And financially?" Margaret asked. "If we sell our current house for the price Robert estimated, and if Jessica and I contribute our savings, we can buy this house and still have money for necessary renovations." "So, we're doing this?" Jessica asked. "We're doing this." The process of selling the old house and buying the new one took 3 months. During this time, they carefully planned what life would be like in the bigger house. Nathan was excited about the prospect of having his own permanent bedroom and a large backyard to play in. Emma, still too young to understand the changes, easily adapted to the coming and going during the moving process. Rachel and Jonathan supported the decision, seeing the advantages for Nathan to have even more stability and an extended family present. "It'll be good for him," said Rachel, "especially as his grandfather, as his condition progresses. Nathan will understand better what's happening if he's there for the process." The move to the new house was a full family event. Rachel and Jonathan helped with boxes and furniture. Old neighbors came to say goodbye. Even some of Jessica and David's co-workers showed up to lend a hand. "It's like a celebration," observed Margaret, watching everyone working together. It is a celebration, confirmed Robert. We're celebrating family. In the first few months in the new house, there was an adjustment period. Establishing routines for 6 people living together, including a young child and an elderly man with dementia, required patience and flexibility from everyone. But little by little, they found their rhythm. Robert had moments of confusion about being in a new house, but the constant presence of family helped him adapt. Margaret flourished with the extra help and constant companionship. Nathan loved having his grandparents always around. Emma grew up surrounded by love and attention. David and Jessica, despite their initial concerns about privacy, discovered that having constant family support made their married life easier, not harder. "When was the last time we went out alone?" David asked one evening. "Last week. Margaret watched the kids while we went to dinner." "And before that?" "The month." "Before that, exactly. We're managing to be parents and a couple at the same time. Who would have thought living with the in-laws would be the solution to our romantic life?" 2 years after the move to the new house, the family had fully settled into their routine. Robert, now with more advanced illness, had good and bad days but was always surrounded by family. Margaret had returned to some activities she'd given up when she was caring for her husband alone. Nathan, now 11, was a responsible and affectionate big brother. Emma at 4 was a happy and confident little girl, and David and Jessica, they had built something neither of them had imagined possible on that chaotic afternoon in the church 5 years earlier. "Remember our first night sleeping together?" Jessica asked one evening as they watched Emma and Nathan playing in the backyard. "I do, both of us clinging to our own sides of the bed, afraid to touch. And now look at us, our own home, 2 kids, a crazy and wonderful extended family. It was worth it. Every hard moment, every crisis, every uncertainty, worth it. Even knowing everything we had to go through, if you could go back in time, would you still accept my crazy proposal?" David stopped watching the kids and turned to face her. "Jessica, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change a thing. Not my past with drinking, not Rachel showing up, not your father's illness, not the financial struggles, because all of it brought us here. And is here good? Here is perfect. Not perfect without problems, but perfect for us." That night, as they put the kids to bed together, Emma in her room, Nathan in the bed he still kept at their house for the nights he stayed over, Jessica reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an impulsive decision at the altar. She had married a stranger to avoid humiliation. 5 years later, she was married to her best friend, the father of her children, her partner in all of life's adventures. "David," she said when they finally lay down. Thank you." "Why?" "For having the courage to accept my proposal, for standing up that day when everyone else stayed seated. Thank you for making the proposal, for having the courage to choose the unknown over the familiar. Do you think we'll manage keeping all this going? Family, marriage, responsibilities? I think we already are. One day at a time, one problem at a time, one joy at a time. And if new problems arise, we'll face them together, like we always have." Jessica nestled into David's arms, feeling a deep peace. Her life hadn't gone as planned. It had turned out better. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, but inside the house, the family slept safe and united. The next morning, Jessica woke to Emma climbing onto the bed. "Mommy, Nathan is teaching Grandpa Robert how to make a paper airplane." "Really?" said Jessica, smiling at the sound of excited voices coming from the living room. "And Daddy's making pancakes. What a special day then." "Every day is special here," Emma declared, with the simple wisdom of a 4-year-old. And she was. Right. In a house full of chosen love, built with patience and maintained with dedication, every day truly was special. When they went downstairs for breakfast, Jessica found her family scattered around the kitchen. David at the stove making pancakes, Nathan patiently teaching his grandfather how to fold paper, Margaret feeding Emma, everyone chatting animatedly. It was exactly the kind of loving chaos she had learned to cherish. "Good morning, family," she said. "Good morning," they all chorused back. And it really was a good day. like every day had become in their extraordinarily ordinary life. 5 years after a bride had been left at the altar and made a wild proposal to a stranger, she had discovered that sometimes the best decisions in life are the ones we make with the heart, not the head. And sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose to build, not the ones we inherit. Years passed, and the family continued to grow and evolve. Nathan became a responsible teenager who naturally divided his time between his two families. Emma grew up surrounded by love and security. Robert Miller lived his final years surrounded by the family he loved, even when his mind could no longer clearly recognize them all. When Robert finally passed away at 78, he was mourned by an entire family that had come together around him. Nathan, now 16, was one of the pallbearers. Emma, at 9, sang a song her grandfather had taught her. He knew he was loved, Father Patrick said during the funeral, and the love he planted continues to grow in each of you. Jessica and David, now married for over a decade, faced the loss together, supporting each other and their family. He saw our family grow, Jessica said on the day of the funeral. He saw that his decision to bring us together was the right one, and he saw Nathan graduate high school, saw Emma take her first steps. He had a full life. Margaret, now a 65-year-old widow, was not left alone. Her chosen family surrounded her with love and support, just as she had done for all of them over the years. A few more years passed. Nathan went off to university to study engineering, but came home regularly. Emma became a bright, determined girl who loved helping David in his woodworking shop. David, now nearly 40, had turned his woodworking business into a small but thriving company. Jessica had become a partner at an accounting firm and earned enough for the family to live comfortably. But above all, they had created something rare, a family united by chosen love, not obligation. On a spring Sunday afternoon, 10 years after the wedding, the entire family gathered in the backyard for a barbecue. Nathan was home from college. Emma, now 12, played with Rachel and Jonathan's children. They'd had 2 kids of their own over the years. Margaret, still energetic at 70, herded everyone for family photos. "Gather up, everyone," she called, waving a camera. "I want a picture of our whole crazy family." And crazy it was. David and Jessica at the center with Emma. Nathan on one side with Rachel and Jonathan and their 2 little ones. Margaret on the other. A family no etiquette book would recognize, but one that worked perfectly. "Say family," Margaret commanded. "Family," they all shouted together. That night, when the guests had left and Emma was asleep, David and Jessica sat on the porch he'd built for their house. 10 years, Jessica said, a decade since that day at the church. Feels like a lifetime. And at the same time like it was yesterday. Do you still remember how it felt to stand up when I asked that question? I do. It was like something inside me knew you were offering the chance for a whole new life. And I was. What about you? Do you remember how it felt to see a barefoot stranger walking down the church aisle toward you? I do. Absolute terror, mixed with this strange certainty that I was doing the right thing. And you were. They fell silent for a moment, listening to the sounds of the night, crickets chirping, wind in the trees, the distant hum of the city. "You know what amazes me most?" David said eventually. "What?" "How much our family has grown. We started as 2 strangers, and now we're the center of a whole network of people who love and care for each other. And we'll keep growing. Nathan will marry someday, bring his own family. Emma will grow up and maybe give us grandchildren. Our story's just beginning. Think we'll have more kids," Jessica laughed. "David Wilson, we're 40 years old, have 2 kids, a huge extended family, and you still want more children. Not necessarily biological, but our home will always have room for anyone who needs family. Like you needed that day at the church." Exactly. Emma appeared at the porch door, still sleepy. "Can I stay with you guys for a little bit?" "Of course, sweetheart," Jessica said, making room on the porch swing. Emma squeezed between her parents. "Mom, tell the story again, how you 2 met." "Again? You've heard it 1,000 times. But I love it. It's like a fairy tale." David chuckled. "A very strange fairy tale. where the princess saves herself and the prince is a beggar. The best fairy tales are the strange ones, Emma declared knowingly. Jessica began the familiar story once more. Once upon a time, there was a bride left at the altar, and she got really mad, Emma continued, reciting it by heart. She did, so she asked a question to the whole church. "The first one to stand up, I'll marry," Emma quoted dramatically. And a kind, brave man stood up. "Dad!" Emma exclaimed, as if hearing it for the first time. And they got married that same day, even though they didn't know each other. David finished. "And they lived happily ever after?" Emma asked, though she knew the answer. "We're living happily ever after," Jessica corrected. "Because our story isn't over yet, we're writing it every day." "What's the next chapter?" "We don't know," David admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." Emma yawned, satisfied with the story. "Can I sleep here with you tonight?" "Of course," said Jessica. "Let's all go to the big bed." As they settled into the king-size bed they had bought when they moved into their new home, Emma between her parents, Jessica reflected on how life had a way of surprising her. 10 years earlier, she had been a single 28-year-old accountant living with her parents, engaged to a man who didn't truly love her. Now she was a wife, mother, daughter, daughter-in-law, stepmother, business owner, all the roles she had taken on and loved. "David," she whispered in the dark. "Thank you for being brave enough to stand up. Thank you for being brave enough to ask the question." And so, in the cozy darkness of her home, her bed, her chosen life, Jessica Wilson fell asleep beside the husband she had known for 5 minutes before marrying, and the daughter they had raised together, knowing she had found exactly what she didn't even know she was looking for. The next day, like every day, there would be challenges, bills to pay, work to do, family responsibilities to fulfill, but there would also be laughter, hugs, little moments of joy that make life extraordinary. And at the end of the day, she would return home, her family, her chosen life, and know she had made all the right choices, especially the most unlikely one of all. The story of the bride who asked, the first one to stand up, Hail Mary, had become the story of a family that proved true love has nothing to do with perfect plans or ideal situations. Sometimes true love is simply having the courage to ask the right question and the wisdom to accept the unexpected answer, and living happily ever after, one imperfect and wonderful day at a time. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Jessica made the right decision? And David, was he brave or reckless to accept the proposal? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this heartwarming journey of love, family, and resilience. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.